potential cuts are just that. They're potential. Tonight is the night in which the Board of Ed will be evaluating the entire budget and those cuts and making a decision. It is not a foregone conclusion one way or the other. The 7 of us will be deliberating tonight. I thank you for your attendance, and I thank you for your input. So with that, Bill, I know you wanted to kind of do a little bit of a filling of information. So we'll do that, and then I know board members still have some questions that they want to get through, and then we'll really start with the detailed discussions of the items in the book that are still hanging out there. So if you want you and your team to do the last minute fill in, and then we will come back with our detailed questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I want to do a little bit of overview, a little more filling out of the 17, and help you as a board understand. Some of you have the history, some of you are new, to kind of understand in a sense where that list is coming from. Want to explain that a little bit. Then I know Dr. Craw wants to elaborate a bit on a few of the items on the list. Since that list came out, we've been around meeting with faculty, meeting with parents. That's prompted some questions that we think might be helpful to you to look at a little more, just give you a little more information. Then I know Rich Rudel wants to share a little more detail with you. He had put into writing for you today some details around 4 of the areas and facilities where there is an increase requested. In terms of this list, this is actually the 3rd year of us trying to create a list of what if. 2.5 years ago, or even about 2 years ago, we had a threat, if you will, and that's the right language, from the state that each locale would have to take on obligations for the pension system. It was projected it could be as immediate as that year, and it could be as much as 30%. In Weston, that number was roughly around $2 million. So as the board then knew, I had pulled the team together, that's the cabinet and the principals, to do a what if. Where would we come up with that money? How would we come up with that money? And that was a very rough, tough list, and we weren't going to reveal that list until we knew indeed that the state had taken that step on the pensions. Fortunately, they did not. As Rich Rudenall looked at some things this afternoon, Rich reminded me that actually, Bill, in the last 2.5 years, everything on that list short of 2 things we have actually done. So meaning what you have now before you as a board, one reason it is all heavily on the academic is we've been protecting against this situation now for 2 years. You know that last year we had a $1.6 million overage in the budget. The year before that we had an $800,000 overage. So just in those 2 years, that's quite a significant sum of money relative to our denominator. In the material you received, slide 44 on the parent slide, or on your slide, slide 56, lists very specifically the set of items over the last 2 years you've been reducing. Very little academic on that, trying to stay as far away from the classroom as possible. Also in the material you received is a listing of the nearly $800,000 in key core work we did not put into this year's budget. So for the parents' presentation, that's slide 47. For you as a board, that's slide 59, meaning the January 17th presentation. So if you take that sense of 2.5 years ago, we started to privately look like what it would mean if we had a severe budget situation in Weston, map that out, and then as we begun moving forward, each of the last 2 years had serious shortfalls. Last year, fortunately, the town was able to step up with a supplemental, but we still had to, as a district, absorb a great deal of that 1.6 ahead of that. What you now see before you is our last resort. We did not want to go anywhere on these 17 items, and they are items I have put on the list based on the advice, but I, as superintendent, have to take ownership for each of these 17. But if it helps you understand that really this is a list 2 years in development, a set of decisions over 2 years of reductions, efficiencies, cutbacks, denied requests by the team here, and this is where we are. Again, to repeat, it's an ordering of total dollars high to low. It's not a prioritization within those 17 at all. But again, I think the history and context matters here. In a sense, this is the 3rd list. I would hope the last list, but we're probably looking at some future budget years, which will be a challenge. But where we are now in Weston is we now have to look at the academic core. We started with facilities. We started with our operations. We started with the copy center. We started with a whole set of things we've listed for you. And now we are having to look at either class size or other programs with an academic piece. On that list are some things that are still administrative, are still, overhead, but this is where we are, some 2 years into constant reductions, constant cutback management. We're saying no to requests for new work from within the district. I know Ken wanted to elaborate some on some of the academic pieces, just for you as a board to have a little deeper understanding of the implications. Then we'll go to Rich and then clearly open it up for any sorts of questions, discussion.
Okay. So briefly, just want to say it's been my distinct pleasure over the last 11 years as a middle school principal and as assistant superintendent to guide the academic program of this district. And we've always come to you with creative, innovative programs, projects. Last year, the Science Research Initiative. This is a very different year, though. This is the first year in my tenure where we've come forward with several academic programs. And I do so with a heavy heart because we've been working on several of these programs in recent years to improve and enhance and develop them. But there were a couple that I want to highlight for you because we didn't really talk about them at the last budget meeting. I know that class size will come up. We're prepared to respond, our team, to answer your questions, as well as Project Challenge. But there were two line items that I wanted to bring your attention to. The first is the science para position, which would significantly impact the K-5 science program if we lose that, as well as the K-2 Spanish program. So I just want to highlight for the board what that impact would look like. So what you see here is today over at WIS, I'll just move a little bit so that the public can see this as well.
You need the mic, Ken.
Oh, thank you. This is the science lab over at WIS, ready for today with several materials set up on the benches, as well as all the materials organized, inventoried, ready to go for the current units that they're conducting. And fifth grade is in the midst of the new science program, and it's material intensive. So where you see here, our science para has set all this ahead of time, knowing that this work would be taking place, teachers would be coming in and out. You see those lab benches. The teachers would have to, without a para's support, conduct this program within their own classes because they can't leave their kids, go set up, have the kids go back to class, clean up, because other classes would be coming in and out. It would have to happen in their own classroom. So the benefit of the science para is being able to keep this moving, have everything ready, and as a new program comes online, like it is this year, there's all that organizing of those materials, and if it was not done by the para, it could fall on the CIL, and that takes away from her coaching role. So here you see a picture in blue, times when people each day would be coming in to use the lab at the intermediate school. In yellow, when they're using the lab over at Hurlbut. So teachers sign up, the paras know, they get those materials for those classes, and it might be 2 different grade levels on a particular day, so they've got to switch out what those materials are. And that's a critical resource for us. And you can see, just even for today, here's several of the things that needed to be set up on the trays. Additionally, safety. Right in the center there, that big white cabinet is for goggles. And there's a UV light lamp that sterilizes them as they go in and out of that cabinet. Each classroom, if science is being done within the classroom setting, would have to have one of those cabinets and its own set of goggles. Or we would not run those particular experiments that would need that. And, today there's a chemistry unit going on that needed a great deal of equipment, safety, and supervision. So just to sum up here, several of the things that I've just highlighted. When we think about the implementation schedule for next year in this proposed budget, we have 3rd and 4th grade coming online with the new curriculum. We'd have to think about readjusting that implementation plan, given the amount of resources that are being infused into those grade levels, and maybe have to delay one of those grades in the process. As I said, experiences take place in teachers' classrooms. You need to outfit the classrooms with safety equipment. And then it could be an impact on the sill. And then also the science fair. The para, just want the board to be aware, does support that K-5 science fair with all the logistical and clerical work that needs to go with that, and works closely with the CIO. Next, the K-2 Spanish program. We didn't get a chance to talk about this, but this is year 5 of a 6-year plan to upgrade our K-5 Spanish program. And we have a cutting-edge model where it's aligned with research. The kindergarten level, we have short bursts every day where teachers come in and deliver instruction to our students in the target language. And it's something that the students really look forward to on a daily basis. So this is one of the items on the reduction list that would eliminate that program from the elementary school. Just want to show you today in those classes the kinds of experiences that the students have. This is Senora McConnell. So then they continue with the Venn diagram, and they go up to the smartboard, interact, and sort colors, and I think you get a sense that they're all engaged on the carpet, and that's a nice break from the other subjects that they have. So if we just get back to the slide for a second. So the reduction would delay learning a second language until 3rd grade. We know that the research says the earlier you start the language, the better it is in terms of trying to get to a level of proficiency. When we think about our students taking Spanish, we have had a goal of trying to increase the number of students getting to Spanish 3 in their freshman year. And so this, currently I think we're at about 70% getting to Spanish 3. I would see that percentage going down starting in 3rd grade. And so currently, one of the things I think about is we've had our system working very hard to develop the curriculum every year, putting the resources in, investing in creating this program. And now, obviously this would be a short-lived program. We really wouldn't be able to assess those gains by losing this program. But I just wanted to give you a sense of those two, since they didn't come up on Tuesday. We certainly, as a team, can answer any questions you have about these or any other curricular programs that are on the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Bill, I know, can we hold Rich off till we get to facilities? Board members I think, are kind of chomping to get to
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
things.
I think
So,
last time we spent a lot of time discussing things that frankly none of us, I think, had any appetite to cut language. And so we all find the value in it, nor actually were we interested in changing policy guidelines. So, and we didn't get to our questions last time because we were discussing them. So I think maybe if we go to our
yeah.
discussions, it'd be
So if we could hold
helpful.
Rich off till we get to facilities.
That works.
I think at this point, guys, if we want to start going through the book, and with any detailed questions you have regarding particular section, anything that we want to discuss as a group, questions we want to ask, so we can start moving through this with a little bit of organization. So let's just quickly jump over. I know we have some big tabs in the front, but let's just quickly get into Hurlbut so we can start having some conversations. Dr. McCursey, I know that at our January 9th workshop, there were questions concerning the kindergarten and 1st grade section requests for next year. My impression from most of the questions is we weren't questioning class size guidelines, we were questioning the projections that are being used to determine the number of sections requested. So I want to open it up to fellow board members to kind of ask their questions and probe along those lines. I know from my personal opinion, I have no desire to adjust our class size guidelines. They're there for a reason, and I embrace them. But I do have questions about the projection used for the budget sections.
And to that point, the budget process is not the time to be discussing a change in class sizes in policy. So if that's something that we really get a sense that there's, something down the horizon that we want to look at, that's a year-long discussion before the next budget that I would offer is the appropriate time to do that. I have no appetite to change class sizes, guidelines.
If I may, I think that some of my fellow board members might have something to say about the kindergarten number. I don't really have anything to say about that, so I'd be interested to hear what some of the other thoughts are. But specifically with the first grade number, I highlighted this kind of unique situation that we're in at a previous meeting, and that is whether we have 6 sections in first grade or 7 sections in first grade, we are not going to be within our class size guideline. Our class size guideline for first grade is 18 to 20. And the numbers as laid out, we're either at 17.57 or 20.5. So there's, and I'm not even going to challenge the projection yet, but I am going to challenge it. And that is, so if we take the projection as completely accurate, we cannot be within our class size guidelines. So within that, we do at some point in time need to have a discussion about our class size guidelines to make them mathematically possible. So assuming that the projection is accurate and we are not going to fall within our class size guidelines, I think we need to have a real conversation about where we want to err. And in this case, assuming that the projection is correct, which I'm not willing to do because the projection assumes that we're going to have a 16 student increase from our current kindergarten cohort to our first grade cohort. And in the data that was provided in our question and answer, that's unprecedented. In the past 5 years, we haven't had a growth rate of 16 in an individual cohort from 1 year in any grade level from kindergarten to 5th grade. So I'm not even really willing to concede that that's accurate, but I'm more than willing to be proven wrong. But even if that were the case and we were at 123 and we had 6 sections, we would have 3 sections at 20, which is within our class size guideline, and we would have 3 sections at 21, which is 1 student over our class size guideline. As opposed to if we went to 7 sections, we would have 4 classes at 18, which is the minimum of our class size guideline, and 3 at 17, which is under our class size guideline. So either way, you're hovering at about 50%. The problem is, I don't see us being wrong and getting more students than the 16. So the odds of our being wrong and having overcrowded classes are not very strong. But if we fall short of that 16 by even a few, we overshot the mark by a lot, and we included an extra section where 1 doesn't need to be there. So with that being the rationale and not willing to discuss class size guidelines, within the context of class size guidelines, I would propose that we budget for 6 sections of first grade for next year instead of 7.
If I may add to that, we have heard from the Board of Finance a number of times in the past recent years that they have a strong preference that we not pre-tax, as they call it, our residents for possible students in situations like this and come to them should we need teachers. If students come forward, that's a lovely problem to have, that we have more bodies than we thought we would. That's wonderful for our town, and they would help us out if we needed to hire a teacher. And I am all for going for, I'd rather have smaller classes and be on the lower end. That's a discussion we can have in the future, but I will take them at their word on that. And if we reduce to the 6, which I agree with Dan on, and we find that we do actually get the 16 first graders, yay for Weston, I think we then could go to the Board of Finance and say, please, may we have a supplemental to hire another first grade teacher, because I agree that it's unlikely, I think, to have 16 families with a first grader move in this summer.
Sarah, would that same rationale hold for adding another class size to kindergarten?
I think this year, yes. I was actually going to suggest that, Ellen. I think that you and I had discussed that it looks like that cohort, I think, probably should stay at 6. Last year we held off and held off and held off and had to reduce that section, and the taxpayers paid for a teacher that we had to reduce. And I'd rather go in the other direction this year, and if, again, had to ask to get a supplemental, I'd rather not, as the Board of Finance has asked us not to, I'd rather not pre-tax. That is just my suggestion. They've asked us repeatedly, and I'm trying to live within the guidelines.
Just
we
we're
have.
one point of information, we didn't reduce, we reallocated based on enrollment needs elsewhere. Isn't that correct?
No, we reduced a kindergarten teacher.
But we reallocated that. We didn't have a surplus FTE, we redirected that.
Are you saying that they went to a different grade level?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to clear in the public record, we did not have a surplus of teachers.
Right.
At all. We redirected that once we knew we had to shift, because, as you know, we monitor it weekly and had made that adjustment. So, I mean, any of these discussions are right. I just want the public record accurate as to what we did, because it just sounded like we had an extra teacher, a surplus to the taxpayer, and that's not the case at all.
No, Bill, if I may, what happened is, as you know, Dan, most board members know that the teachers hold certifications to K through 6, so it's an elementary certification. Teachers get reallocated if we have too few in kindergarten and we have too many at WIS. We'll reallocate. I couldn't give you the specifics right now, but we don't lay off teachers during the summer like that. So because there's we have to do so by May 1st, and if not, you would have to come to the board. It's a special procedure. So we saw some blips up and down, as you know, for years. That's what happens with enrollment projections. But no, we didn't have a surplus teacher that I'm aware of. No, I don't think so.
We are talking about if hypothetically, if the estimate is correct at 123 students for first grade, we're talking about a 2% variance between our variance, right? 18 to 20 students for lower grades. And I'm all for lower classroom per teacher ratio, because I think that is the bread and butter of this town, and that's what gives us a competitive advantage against any other town. That being said, 2% variance, wouldn't we just say this year we are going to make an amendment to the policy and allow below the 18 limit ratio and allow this to go through at 17.6? Because that's your argument, right? It's already below our policy, but it's
We don't have a policy.
No, it's a
We have
guideline.
It's a
guidelines.
Yeah.
So there
Excuse
is
me.
discretion on any move that we make.
We're already below that. I mean, our K
Right, but-
right now is at
so-
17.8.
To address that, Ruby, the challenge I have with this is assuming a best-case scenario, which is Malone and McBroom hit it right on board, we're under our guideline. And so if your guidelines are going to have any integrity, you can't choose when you're going to follow them and when you're not. You can't say, our guidelines exist for the maximum because we don't want to go over, but they don't really exist at the minimum, and we're okay with doing that. And that's the best case scenario. Historically, this has happened before. Years ago, an extra section was budgeted and for second grade, and class sizes came in somewhere around 17. And the fallout was pretty significant. So I agree with Sarah, and I think it's important to highlight the fact that I'm not suggesting that we overcrowd our classrooms or that we push through. And if the enrollment plays out such that, we get weekly, sometimes multiple times a week enrollment reports, and it's tracked every day during the summer. If it looks like we're trending over the class size guideline, then we have the ability to go to the Board of Finance for a supplemental appropriation and to get that extra class size. But to budget for that class size now, assuming a best case scenario that hasn't happened in the past 5 years, I don't see it as being a responsible move. And I don't think that you could say, well, it's okay if we come in a little short. You take away the integrity of the guidelines in that case.
But it's advantageous to every parent with a child in that grade.
Well, I would contend that 19 or 20 in first grade is also advantageous. That's not, I'm not suggesting we go up to 24, right? Because where do you draw the line? Because, you know, some research would suggest that the opportune class size is 16, right? So are we suggesting that we want to go down to 16 because there's research out there that says that that is the optimal class size? So I don't think we at all put anyone at a disadvantage with the class size of 20. And if it looks like we're going through the class size guidelines as we get closer with more real data in front of us, then I think absolutely we should be having a conversation about going to the town for supplemental appropriation to hire that extra first grade teacher. But to budget for it now, I can't see it.
Can I just, oh, can,
Which one?
I
Can I
wanted to
answer
answer a
first?
question of something Dan said, but you guys tell me when you want me.
You got
Well,
Laura,
I don't
you
know,
can-
Laura, you first.
yeah, I just wanted to add a couple things to think about. So historically, since I've been here, we've always budgeted based on projections, which I think I hear what you're saying is that would be a change in practice where we would not budget based on projections for a coming year. And when I look at the data for incoming first grade, it is an entry year for many of our students. They come out of FIVES programs. And over the last 5 years, 2 of the last 5 years, we did have an increase of 13 students. Another 2 years, over the last 5 years, we had an increase of 11 students. We did have 1 year that was a very low increase, but we do, 4 out of the 5 most recent years, we've had 11 or 13 students between the end of year kindergarten numbers and the beginning of first grade. For example, 13-14 school year, we ended the year with 139 kindergartners. We started our following school year with 150 first graders. It is an entry year, and we have that data in the table. The other thing to think about is at 7 sections that would, we based on the guidelines, we turn to the 7th section at 120 students, which would be a 13 student increase, which we have had historically over the last 5 years.
Wouldn't we at 14? Wouldn't the 14th student be the one to trigger?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate
Which,
that.
yes, is a little higher than what we've had, but over the last 5 years, we have had a significant number come into the first grade.
Yeah, and in practice, since it's a guideline, depending on when that triggers, we were prepared to go above guideline at WIS this year for budget reasons.
Correct.
And then to actually look at the mix of students in the classes in terms of the various needs. So this is truly a guideline. Because for budget purposes, we did not have a surplus teacher. We didn't budget that way. We weren't going to increase. My first year here, we had to increase for enrollment, and that was about a couple $100,000. We did not go to the Board of Finance for it. The view was not to go to them for that help. That was a board decision based on discussion with the Board of Finance. The view there was first see what you can do within. A number of you were on the board at that point. Ellen, you were chair. A lot of discussion. So we absorbed that overage. Last year, because we knew that we probably, given the other supplemental we were facing, we were prepared to go above guideline in full discussion with the board. So again, this is a guideline.
But, you know, I think even if it's a guideline, what Dan is saying, that we're prepared to look at the situation down the road and adjust if we do find that we're going to go over our guideline. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And to Laura's point, I appreciate what you're saying, and I looked at the numbers the same way you did. And the reason I feel comfortable doing this is because, as you pointed out, the average increases were 11 to 13. Both, 13 is what keeps us within our guidelines. So, I don't necessarily think, I agree with you that our practice has been to use the projections for budgeting purposes. The anomaly this year that we haven't experienced at any point in time is that neither number of sections puts us within that very narrow guideline window, which is why when we have the conversation, if we have the conversation, we need to have a very real discussion about expanding either the lower end or the higher end, but 18 to 20 is just too narrow of a window. So with all due respect, I do think that I'm taking the projections into account when determining how many sections we should budget for.
I would even challenge that the discussion should be not just expanding that guideline by 1 or 2 on either side, but perhaps
How much you're willing to borrow.
developing a philosophy for doing something special for Weston, and that is developing small kindergarten, first grade classes, and changing the way you deliver education, and making us a magnet for anybody out there who wants to have a child in a small, very give and take environment. So I would think that's a discussion that should start to, as soon as the budget's finished this year.
And to that end, Ellen, so I guess I was not truthful when I said that I didn't have anything to say about the K enrollment, because I guess I do. In that light, I definitely think that we should leave the kindergarten proposed number of sections at 7, only because for the various challenges that accompany kindergarten in projecting where the students are coming from, the challenges that exist within a kindergarten classroom. I think, and the numbers, quite frankly, are nowhere near as close. If you come even relatively close to your projection, you're over your guidelines. So in that respect, and I think having a smaller kindergarten class size is a much different conversation than having a smaller class size at any other level, although I understand the importance of first grade as well. Kindergarten is really that entry point, and that's where I would feel a lot less comfortable being over by one student in kindergarten than I would be in first grade.
I don't think I don't think any of us are advocating being over. I really don't. I think that we're all anticipating that these numbers, this is an unusual year where all of these numbers are breaking in a way. In any usual given year, our projections don't fall like this, and which is why we're having the charts of where are we today and not where were we in October or what's going on, because these numbers aren't what we usually see. So we're having to get much more granular, which is why we're having these discussions. And I think that none of us are talking about wanting to go over in any of these. I'm saying this right now. I feel pretty strongly that especially down in the K-1-2 world, that our guidelines are serious, that those classes need to be small, and that we would need to get extra teachers if we go over. I feel very strongly about that. I just feel like, given what we're looking at, given what's been the pattern in the past couple of years, that we're pretty safe in not having these extra teachers. And I just feel like with this budget and how things have been going the past couple of years, that this is a risk that is safe to take.
What's the data to support? Because kindergarten is a lot harder to predict because we don't have the data. What's the data to support that we're safe?
We've seen we went from 113 to 109, and the reason that the projections are up for kindergarten next year is because we sort of a birth blip in 2014?
2014, there was a
14 to
yeah.
71, that plus the assessment or the estimate of in-migrations into town puts that number in the 120s, which I think is a real stretch. And it's, I think, using your argument, Dan, I think it probably holds in spades for kindergarten. I just don't trust that in birth rates.
If you look at page 69 in the book, like most years, it looks as if they're counting on an in-migration of around
55.
Around 50,
Yeah.
50 to 55. Even accounting for the birth rate blip, it keeps us very close to the 120 to stay at 6 sections instead of 7.
Yeah.
Louis, is there a page in the budget book that has what the projected kindergarten enrollment has been for the past 5 years and what the actual has been, so we can get? And I know we haven't been with Malone and McBroom for that long.
They actually, that's one of the things that I've been trying to find, which is what did they project and what was actual? And
Well-
I don't think there's a chart.
Well,
Is
the
there a
problem
chart in
is
one place?
we'd have to create a new chart, so,
Yeah.
which is fine, but we had a different demographer handle the projections up until we had 2 of them last year. and then-
Well,
But Dan, you can at
It's-
least look
it's-
at page 62,
But yes,
and that gives you the birth rates by birth year for the past few years and the kindergarten enrollment. And you can see we don't have over 50 coming in any of the recent years. If you look on page 62.
Right.
I'm looking sideways, so apologies if I missed a number. I
Yeah,
guess back in 2014 we did.
Yeah, I mean, we can produce the other firms' charts. I mean, we had them intentionally one year going the same, and they were very, very close.
Yeah,
And-
they're not-
And
I mean-
back over time, we know that K, both demographers have missed on the K almost every year.
Yeah,
And-
and it's
and-
not, it's within, we're talking within plus or minus 5 to 10, not within 1 to 2. That's that kind of deviation.
But again, it's to the point of like the past few years, we really haven't been having an in-migration of over like 50 to 55 kids.
Am I reading this correctly, that the the number of births in the year
Which
that
page
will.
are you on, Dan?
I'm on page 69. So the number of births that happened in 2014, which would lead to the upcoming kindergarten
Right.
enrollment, is 71.
Right.
And we're projecting a class size of 128. So looking back at the chart on 62, the last 2 years that had 71 births were 2008 and 2009, which yielded class sizes of 136 and 140. So just, proportionally speaking,
The in-migrations, though, between birth and kindergarten, though, in those years was much higher. It's the in-migrations have been trending down considerably over the years.
right, but as recently as 2016-17, you had a class size of 128 with 49 births. So this is 22 more births with a projected class size of the same. So
But
that's
the
factoring in.
in-migrations have been much, much lower.
But that's factoring in. You have a
They're-
22 in-migration margin of error there in that
Right.
case. If you had 49 births in a
Right.
class size of 128, and now we have 71 births in a class size of 128, you could have 22 fewer students come in for kindergarten and
Okay.
still hit your 128 number just based on births alone.
Okay,
You could. It's a calculated risk.
yeah, it's a risk.
So-
It's the same
A-
risk
and-
we're taking for first grade.
Well,
It's the same one. I mean, because it's an adjustable, if the margins are
Yeah.
so tight,
Yeah.
and we can always adjust after the fact.
Well,
You're saying the same thing.
I disagree, actually, because I don't think it's the same risk for a number of reasons. One, kindergarten to first, we have more hard data on enrollment. Number two, the margins are a lot farther away. It's 5 students. And so I don't think it's the same thing. I think it's maybe variations of the same thing. The other thing to consider is that, and this has to be a consideration when we talk about staff development and the quality of staff and our professional development and how much we invest in our staff, is right now K to 5, which is this, I'm going to ignore grade 6 for a second. Right now K to 5, with the budget as proposed, we're +1 FTE, right? So if we go on my recommendation to not add the extra first grade teacher, we are flat for FTE. If we then don't add a kindergarten teacher, we may be potentially losing some of our capacity in staff members that we have invested in, that we've developed in, that we've trained in the different curricular areas. And I don't know how much of a consideration that should be, but it has to at least be discussed.
Ruby, thoughts on kindergarten?
I think that we are, I think that we are all saying between kindergarten and first grade, that we're contemplating one teacher. Where I see I don't know, I go back to predictions in terms of we have 107 kindergartners today with 6 sections. And the estimate for next year is 128 with 7 sections. I would just question the projection for next year. We are saying for next year that our kindergarten class will be higher than first grade. When was the last time that our kindergarten class was larger than first grade?
Well, I mean, the key is looking at how the cohorts move through, as opposed to, I get the point. It's just that it's using the cohort movement and
Yes.
the adjustments there. I mean, I think what I'm hearing very clearly is the board is not willing, within a budget context, to make a class size policy decision or a policy decision around class size.
So
Again,
that
it's
is
it's
absolutely
guidelines.
correct.
I do want to clarify, we have not been using we do up to 20 for K1. There's that narrow band, because again, so I think, lots of good thinking here. Instead of adjusting the class size, adjust the number of sections. And we've managed that actually very carefully the last couple of years here. Just to witness when I got here, the decision was to add a couple of teachers, so we had to do that, or the class size would have been too large. This past year, given the reluctance by the board and administration to go to the Board of Finance for a supplemental, we decided we would maybe have class sizes a little bit larger. We didn't do that. So meaning next year, as we track this, we'll be either deciding to go back to the Board of Finance for a supplemental. There may or may not be the appetite for that. I wouldn't assume that that's an automatic. Or just to modestly be above the guideline in one or more classes.
The one thing I would caution us on is to not, while I believe that we need to look critically at all the data, I mean, we have hired Malone and McBroom for a reason. And kindergarten enrollment is traditionally one of the most difficult things to predict. And what we're saying is that they're going to be off by 9 students out of 128, which is such an incredibly high margin of error. We should be careful not to supplement our judgment for theirs. They are the demographers. They are the experts. If we're going to do that, we might as well save the $6,000 to $8,000 that we pay the demographers to do that at all. If we're going to
Good point.
ignore something
point.
that blatant.
So, I just would kind of like to get a feel for where people are feeling. I guess, listening to you guys, I think there's a consensus to look at the projection of first grade and consider adjusting that request down to 6 sections. Is there kind of a consensus on that from people for
Yeah.
first
Yes.
grade?
Yeah.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Jacqueline?
And then kindergarten?
You know, kindergarten's tougher. I mean, we do have to be cognizant of the fact there was a birth rate blip. And it's how, you know, how aggressive do we want to be with making a cut, taking all the factors into consideration. The training we've invested into our teachers, the birth rate blip, and, you know, what we have as far as best estimate from a demographer. Do we keep kindergarten at 7, or do we?
I would go to 6 and keep our eye on it. So,
I appreciate that approach.
Yeah,
I'm comfortable with it.
comfortable with
6.
that.
Okay.
I think from a budget approach standpoint.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you're saying you'd adjust at the kindergarten level?
Yep.
Yeah, let me just give you a number. Malone and McBroom was off by 0.87 for the entire projection. I would challenge this board to find any educational organization where your demographers were that close. I mean, so, but they also, if Mike Zuba were here, he would say probably this adjustment at K would match where it's most volatile, so thus it makes most sense, in a sense, go off prediction. But I think I would be very cautious as a board to move away from them too much, because writ large, they're a very sophisticated firm, bringing together all kinds of analysis, and at only missing it by 0.87 overall. And that also matters, because we need the ability, certainly K-6, to move teachers around, to not then add a budget burden. So, but again, in summary, if you were to say, let's modify at the K level, I would actually think Mike Zuba might say, all right, that's a reasonable move on your part, because that is where we're most volatile. That prediction is most fraught with reliability. I would be very cautious, though, further up the ladder to say this firm isn't providing good advice. I don't know, Lewis, if you might add to that, because we also know.
Never go to the middle
Never,
school.
never,
No, no, no,
never,
no.
never.
No, but I did hear a comment a few minutes
No.
ago about maybe we just save the $8,000.
No,
I was
I mean,
kidding.
No, no, no,
No,
that
no.
was, that was sarcasm.
Well,
No, see, there's no-
Okay, we're in a public meeting,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everything said in
No,
a
no,
public
no, no.
meeting's in the record,
No,
and
no, no,
I
no.
just, this is very serious stuff.
Take it off the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, no.
Let the minutes reflect the
There
joke.
is one thing I'd like to add, given that Dr. McCursey invited me to do so, and it's a little bit, you just need to be cautious when you do go off the projections like this, and you talk about going for supplemental appropriations. You need to remember that that takes time. And what often happens, and we've seen it happen here in West End, is we see a surge over the summer, in which case all of a sudden your small kindergarten classes, if you were to reduce them, this budget by one teacher, are going to be too big, and you're going to have a lot of upset parents. It isn't easy to go to the Board of Finance and get a supplemental appropriation approved when we have an influx of students in the middle of July. So we would need to make that decision, the board would need to make that decision earlier in the summer,
Okay.
again, based on projections and sort of trends. If I could never, it could be the first week of August, and all of a sudden we're over a couple kids, and you're going to have class sizes over 20 in kindergarten pretty consistently, and all of a sudden we don't have time to go for it. We'd have to just do it and hope for the
Okay.
best.
We've done that.
We have.
Yeah, and that would be the problem. So
Okay.
just be cognizant of that piece. I'm not saying
Okay.
it's a bad idea or a good idea, just
Okay.
remember that piece.
Understood.
If I could add, it's clear that I'm in the minority on this, and that's fine. But what I would suggest is that we preserve our options. We're so early on in the budget process, and by by making that cut and reducing that kindergarten section now, we're limiting our options. I might suggest that we may eventually settle in on 6 as being the number for kindergarten, but we have multiple opportunities to make that adjustment. Certainly, the Board of Finance is going to have their opportunity to weigh in on our budget, and they perhaps may come back. While I understand that they don't have line item power, they do have the power to suggest a number that could be cut, which may coincidentally coincide with what it costs for one teacher. But to do that now, it's very premature, and it leaves
Okay.
us no options.
All right, so, but because we've got a lot to get through tonight, what I think I would like to propose at this point, I think there's a consensus to reduce grade 1 down to 6 sections because of the concern about the projection. I'd like to table the decision on kindergarten. Let's get through the rest of the book, and then maybe we might have some additional thoughts on the number in total that we're coming out at, and that could make us, sway us one way or the other and kind of view it as a whole. So let's come back to it. We've got a lot more we need to do, and then we can continue discussing kindergarten. The one question I would have, Bill, just related to that for people just to think about, if the decision was to reduce kindergarten down to 6 sections, would you also have a reduction in a kindergarten para as well?
Is that in that?
Is that in
Yeah.
the 177 number?
No,
No.
Because we're gonna
No.
hire one. It's
Okay.
in the budget.
.38.
Okay.
So the kindergarten para would be $12,596.
In the
So that would be in addition to the 177.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I'm not, I just think that we need to keep moving, and then we can maybe get some clarity and come back and regroup on that particular point. I just want us to keep moving along. Anything else with respect to Hurlbut?
Sorry, just to clarify, on page 99, the extra para is 11,701.
Yeah.
There are payroll taxes associated with employees.
You have total,
Oh,
multiple categories. You
Um,
can never take one category as the answer. It doesn't work.
Yeah. At the intermediate school, I don't have any questions to the intermediate school.
None.
The enrollment projections are right in line with students.
bursting at the seams.
Yeah, that we have, no concerns.
Which is a good problem.
Before I whiz by, anybody else have any questions about WIS?
No.
Middle school?
The duplicate books that was
Yes, the
suggested
duplicate social
in
studies.
They've all
the
taken it.
admin doc, I would love to adopt that suggestion.
Can you put that in?
Yep.
Are you keeping the list,
Please.
Rich, by the way? Okay, yes. The social studies books, yes, please. Any other questions about the middle school from an operational standpoint?
Nope.
Yes? Yes?
Okay, so while I'm not really inclined to, and I understand the approach we're taking is to use the book as our guideline and not the list per se. It does pertain to the middle school, and with all due respect to our PTO presidents who are here in the audience and listening at home, and myself being a former PTO president, I am always reluctant to suggest that we look to the PTO for money of things that should be in our budget. But it was brought up, and so it pertains to the middle school. The Colonial Day at the middle school. I have read Dan's description on that. I see the value of a program like that. I see how it enhances the learning experience and how it is a meaningful day for students, and I fully support it 100%. The PTO's charter is to donate money for things that enhance the educational experience and let the school pay for the things that are core educational experiences. And I know it's a small amount of money, but it's almost a matter of principle. I wonder if we don't look at, as a board, reclassifying that as an enhancement and removing it from our budget. And with all due respect, work collaboratively with the PTO and see if that is something that they would have an appetite to fund for next year.
I have to say, I had the same thought this morning, Dan, when I was sitting at the Hurlbut and WIS PTO meeting, when I was looking at their philanthropy statements, And both of those schools earmark about $6,000 for what they consider talent on tap, which are these enhancement type programs. And I had the same thought. I just don't know. I mean, I know we can't expect, but do you know what the budget they've allocated to you for these types of enhancement programs? And if you are currently using those funds for enhancement programs?
Our PTO has been extremely generous to the middle school. In fact, it was through their generosity, as I said, that we were able to bring this program. My commitment to the PTO was that we would, if we found it a worthy and important program for our students, that we would incorporate it into the Board of Education budget, which is what we did. I would have to go back and have a conversation with them about future support of that same program. But they have been very generous to us in many, many ways.
And I spent more time on that one than anything else, and have come to the conclusion that it is such a vital part of that 8th grade curriculum. It
I
can't
know.
be separated from what we offer
No, I know.
as a program for our
I mean,
kids.
it's part of
So
the
I've gone
curriculum.
the opposite way.
Yeah, I'm going on that one. It's part of our curriculum now.
I know how much the kids enjoy it, so I would want it to happen whether whoever funds it, I would want it to happen. It was just, we have to ask the question.
Yeah, that falls squarely on the you have to ask the question, because I mean we're constantly wrestling with this, enhancement versus core topic. I'm okay to move past this one, but I think the question had to at least be asked.
Yeah,
So.
no, I agree with that. Anything else for the middle school? Weston High School? Is this the point, guys? Just, there are a few items that were included on the 17 that related to the high school. Do we want to have those discussions now? How we feel about those, or come back to them? The 2 assistant coaches,
Those were
parking
athletics.
fees, just to, like,
The parking fees, the other thing was athletics, so that's an.
yep, sorry, parking fees.
There's lots of them.
I wasn't inclined to touch anything that touched the students, so I hadn't actually, I'd written all of that off. I wasn't interested in any of these, so.
Well, I mean, I guess the thing with clubs, Jacqueline, is it kind of goes back to the idea of during the budget process, we don't want to reassess class section guidelines. I do feel looking and evaluating our clubs and our extracurricular activities, some sort of regular basis has merit, and if there are efficiencies, they should be considered. But I don't want to necessarily, for the sake of just a dollar, make a decision in the moment. I would rather not touch the clubs this year, and let's actually just have a more comprehensive review in the future and see what the options are. But I just don't have an appetite to ding our students.
My thought on these was that we used to, in the budget process, look at all of the clubs in the beginning of who was in them, what number, the enrollment, and they were sort of on notice from the beginning, and we did through the process. And if we need to take another look, people are on notice now. If we do need to come back on a second look, that we will be looking. But I am hesitant, and this is just me, I'm one person, to cut into things on this list that are affecting the kids without having put them on notice. These are things that I would have done in a process that would have been more deliberative and along the way. So I'm not inclined to just look at them off the cuff like that. I don't think that they were necessary in this process. If they had been something that was of interest originally, I know that the principals, in going through their buildings and bringing us their budget, already did this, and these didn't come to us in their original budgets. So that was not something I felt inclined to look at tonight.
So maybe to clarify the question, it wasn't really around numbers for its own sake. I mean, it's here for a reason. We talked about it on Tuesday. So I think the overarching question I have around sort of the items that actually hit this list versus anything else, it's minor here in terms of why it's here, and was it just sort of a suggestion that you had potentially, Lisa, of trying to find a way to participate in this effort to find reductions? Because that question in terms of even Ken's earlier comments around the Spanish program and the para-educator, I was just globally trying to figure out if they're so key and they're so critical and it kind of messes up a prior investment, how did those particular ones land here?
Well, let me answer that, and then I'll just come back, Phil. We want you to fund the 4.32. We do not want you to reduce it. The signaling that we're receiving is you, at least as a board, need to consider ways to reduce that 4.32. And in doing that, then for several weeks, have been scouring for opportunities. And again, let me repeat that for the last 2 years, we've been making reductions and cutbacks, staying away from any of these kind of programs. This is what we're left with. So even if you don't talk about them now, if then you pick the number, and other bodies in town say that growth number is not affordable, and then you come back, we're going to be right back at a list like this. So like it or not, districts at this moment, and I said earlier, I can appreciate not wanting to do class size discussions, but I only have to look to the southern end of Fairfield County, where a district, put class size right on the list. That's where they all are. New Canaan's looking at it right now. So again, you don't want to do it, but when you're, so let me be clear. We want you to support the 4.32. These are not here's recommendations, suggestions, or another way to say this is literally where we are in Weston right now. About what is left as we try and balance a budget with, and there's certain things we're not going to do. We're not going to security guards again. We're not going there. There are other things, I think we're right up against it on facilities, and I think we'll talk about facilities later. That's where we've tended to go. So there are a set of areas operationally, away from the classroom, away from the students, away from the programs, and again, we have all those lists, and in great summary, Tite said in those 2 PowerPoint slides, that's where it is. Thus, that's where we are here. So I think Lisa can speak to why this set of items were there from the high school, and again, it's trying to minimize any of the pain, any of the impact on core programs, to try and at least give some ideas about if that 4.32 is not affordable, where do you get some possible reductions? You as board members may see some separate things, but for us deep in this, and again, 2.5 years ago we started the process of if we had a major cut, what would we do? Again, that was that pension risk.
Right.
And we had begun prioritizing back then. This may not have been on the list, but the themes. Stay as far away from the students and the classrooms as much as you can. And then remember, earlier, you do not see any high school classes here. We're prepared to speak to that if you want. There are high school classes with small enrollment.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
As I've been working the district the last couple of weeks, we've had a few say, well, wait a minute, you're talking class size at the elementaries. What about those 7, 8, 9 student high school courses? They're not on the list because we do not want to take a course opportunity away from a student 9, 10 years into their Western experience, because that's what that would do. So that's a part of if it's helpful.
Bill, I just have a comment. When you look at, and kind of related to what you said, when you look at the chart you put together earlier, this is the executive summary, had salary, benefits, and sped being 87% of our budget. That, I look back 10 years ago, that was 80%, and if you look forward, that's going to potentially go into the 90%. So it's becoming more and more difficult to find dollars because that important bucket is going to really be the entire pie very soon, right? And so it's what makes our job very difficult is that we have to comb through. It's not that it's not negotiable, but negotiating that what is going to be 90% of our budget is very difficult because every item affects something. And our challenge is trying to go through there to find the things that are really affecting our students the less, which is harder and harder every year as that part of the pie increases.
That's been, that's what we're living, yes.
Yeah.
Tony, I think that's very well said. I agree with it 100%. And I think that, to kind of add on to what you just said, I think the items on this list and maybe some items that are not on the list need to be looked at. The items on this list need to be looked at and they need to be discussed. But this is not the time. Right. Sonia said something very interesting in her in her public comment when she juxtaposed our stewardship of the tax dollars with our responsibility to preserve the integrity of the educational system. And I think this is a perfect example of that, which is we need to recognize the areas that can accomplish both objectives and work in synergy. And to examine some of these issues now, class sizes and some of the offerings and project challenge and things like that, to examine them now in this context is to only look at them through a budgetary lens.
Right,
And
a
it's
financial
not
lens.
from
That's
a
right.
curricular lens. So in that regards, I'm
That's
willing
why
to
we're here.
not consider these. But that said, we have our work cut out for us. And I think if we wait until next year's budget to start looking at these things, I think we've done everyone a disservice. I think we need to start taking a look at it now. I said it in the budget workshop, and you kind of encapsulated it, which is the low-hanging fruit is gone. You know, the efficiencies, you know, Rich has done an excellent job. He's rebid everything that could possibly be rebid. His predecessor here started us along those roads, and we had six-figure savings in a number of different cost centers. You know, those things aren't there anymore. Now we rebid a contract and save $15,000. It's a huge win.
Right.
So we do need to take a look. And it's already happening in a very organic way. You know, the one thing I'd like to congratulate our administration on is a curriculum committee, when they bring a new initiative to us, 90% of the time, it's cost neutral. They've either reallocated FTE or they've found money to shift resources around to acquire the books or whatever the case may be. So we're already doing that very important work of examining our educational programs and looking at the opportunities to enhance them, and sometimes that includes removing some redundancies. And we need to start doing that now, but to look at things through just a budgetary lens is only accomplishing one of the two tasks that Sonia alluded to, and I think we need to do everything looking at it through two lenses.
Well, so I think that this, you know, as Bill was saying, and just the overall theme here is that it is clearly starting to impact core areas that we've prioritized not to do so far, okay? And in terms of just over time, what we've seen in the budget even last year and the prior year is overages that we had to solve for, right? And we have freezes. I heard one on Tuesday. We solve operationally issues where we have overruns. So we're already doing that anyway within what we're doing. So I think, you know, this to me is more of a statement about sort of where we are, the cuts that we are looking if we had to, and it's sort of a preparatory type of
Yeah,
document, so
and
I
let me
understand.
repeat a really important point, because for some of this is our third year here, some of it's our seventh year in this area, and I talk with the other superintendents. The best funded districts in this region are doing the exact same conversation right now. They are suddenly having to look at class size, and by the way, we're better on class size than anyone but New Canaan, who's getting forced to look at class size right now. ER9 is below us, but they're not going to afford that. They have an 8% request to their community, which I can't believe the community's going to be able to afford that. And one of my most, and I'll use a personal pronoun here, one of my most vocal faculty members yesterday, who I can count on for tough questions, said, I don't like this list, but thank you for the list, and thank you for the impact statements, because if this is where we are now in Weston, we need to be open and clear about it. And if you as a board decide tonight not to dig into this list, I would urge us to find the rigor and maturity, and we're very mature and rigorous, to then soon come back to what's on this list, either policy-wise or otherwise, because we'll be right back here. And if other bodies in town, through their full rights of authority, say we're not going to grant whatever number the board decides, this is where we're coming right back to this list
Absolutely.
6, 8, 10 weeks from now.
And
So that's where the whole, and again, and I don't want to stress it, this is not upside down. We started as far away from the classroom as we could, as far as we can, and unfortunately, this is now where we are.
Well, I would just like to say, Bill, I mean, I think that's, part of this is, you know, when we saw the list, there are things on here that are very valid conversations to have from an evolution and, you know, efficiency and effectiveness standpoint. I know we recently just, you know, reassessed Project Challenge from a curriculum standpoint, but then our middle school totally changed their whole structure. Are there opportunities to actually have a broader level of enrichment at the middle school that might change the way Project Challenge is handled? We're able to actually help more students. we can't make that decision right now, but those are the types of thought processes we need to be having, so we can consider a future, as we're continuing to evolve. So I think we were all just kind of struggling with these types of cuts without the full chance to, yeah.
Right, I mean, I think we are good with maybe the books, and then maybe 7, reduction in contracted cleaning
Most
services.
definitely.
Yeah, we-
Yeah,
Okay,
without a
we're
doubt,
good with
that's-
that, that's nice.
But back to the high school, because we got to kind of keep moving. Anything with the high school, we do have on this list the parking fees.
Was that what is the parking fee now?
75 a semester.
It's a revenue
Parking
driver.
now is 75 a semester for a total of 150. Students park, seniors park 150 up front, juniors park 75 per semester. So, because some juniors don't get their license until the spring semester.
So I'm going to say I conceptually have no problem with this, and speaking as somebody who will have a driving student in the near future, I have no problem with the idea because we provide buses, so this is not something that students have to do. And for the planet, it's better if they don't all drive and everybody eventually is a junior or a senior, so we're not targeting kids unfairly. However, I'm not sure if we've given them enough notice about this potential change is why I'm struggling. Again, this is where I struggle about making decisions this quickly, where we're not getting time to have feedback on how people feel about this for the amount of money we're getting. I just, if we're doing it as a policy because we want to discourage kids from driving, that's a different thing from trying to increase the fees because we're offsetting a cost, which it
Well,
actually
the
doesn't
only
do.
thing I would say is if we're talking about just a
No.
straight fee, I mean, this is the budget discussion, and if we do
Right.
have to assess, ways to adjust our bottom line, we
Right.
do have to make some financial
Right.
decisions. I did ask Dr. McCursey because when we had the workshop, we questioned, were all fees assessed? Are we charging the right amount? We did get feedback on, athletics hasn't been adjusted in maybe 3 years, I think it is. We got, this list had an increase to the parking fee, but no suggestion for an increase on athletics or even an increase on company. And I look at it from the standpoint, the parking lot's the parking lot, and the cost of the parking lot doesn't change, but the cost for us to run our athletic programs and the cost for us to run company and do 2 productions, they keep escalating year after year after year. And it's only reasonable to expect, if we have a fee for that type of activity, that it should have some sort of increase, at least periodically. There should be some sort of increase to be commiserate, I did ask if we could see an estimate of if we adjusted
Yeah,
athletics
we can speak to
and/or
that.
company, what the number might be.
I'd like to hear what Lisa has to say on
Yeah,
this.
we can speak to that when you want us to.
Let's do it.
Between Rich and Lisa,
It's a
it may be a tag team, so.
Go ahead, Rich.
So the question at least Bill passed on was what would it be if we increased the athletic fee by $25? Assuming the same hardship level, it would generate $21,437. A lot of districts, and Mark can chime in as well, but have recently actually gotten rid of their participation fee. Brookfield, who's in our conference, actually got rid of their participation fee. New Milford is proposing in their 20 budget to get rid of their participation fee. I think Mark has some input and some insight on the impact of what an increase in participation fee would be too.
Yeah, thanks for coming to the mic so the world can hear you, sir.
I'll come here and use this one. We did just raise it 3 years ago, and that was after it had been at the price that it was at since I had been here. So that was since '99 that it was at $75. We raised it to $100 3 years ago. My concern at that time would be reiterated tonight, and that is that if we're going to go back to hit the athletes again, I really think we need to look at all of our co-curriculars. I don't think it's fair to go back to this party.
Well, and that's why I said
only,
particularly company and everything else,
and
it does have to be
right,
across the
all
board.
all the clubs and company and all the other co-curriculars that are involved as well. And we did that kind of last time and put a fee on company, and I'm certainly not asking for everyone to have fees, because that's not the point, but I think it should be equitable. And right now, you know, it isn't. So if we're going to look to do that, then I think we have to look to be equal across the board.
Agree 100%, Mark.
And as Rich said, and hopefully you got the numbers that I collected from Durgay and from the SWC, some of our schools still aren't charging, some of our conference schools and some of the Durgay schools, many still aren't charging participation fees. Those that are, I think we're in a pretty good spot. There are a couple that are higher than us, some are much higher than us, and then there's many that are below us. So I don't know how that factors into it.
So is this number just increasing athletics? Okay.
May I say something?
We also looked at it for theater, but go ahead, Lisa, please.
Okay. These are just a couple of thoughts, and I did run them by Dr. McCursey in talking. You know, as you said, these are things that we didn't want to put on the list, but we put on the list. And when parking was mentioned at the other workshop, we put it on the list. I have mixed feelings about charging for parking, and I do have another possibility that the board might want to consider. First of all, the reason I have mixed feelings about the parking is when we started as a way to generate revenue, so we're charging the students to basically, you know, use the pavement in the parking lot. And they said, well, you could take the bus if you want, but it's very difficult when you're the administrator answering the phone and a parent who's working says that there's no late buses for my child. Years ago, we used to have the late bus. Here's a quarter, they'll take you home. Or we're trying to call the intermediate school if they stay over an hour and they've missed their bus to get them on the bus, and they, you know, they don't have a car if they are doing sports right after school and things like that. So, or they work, community service, all those things. So it's not as easy as just having these upperclassmen take the bus. The other thing I would say is if we're looking to generate, what is it, approximately 15,000? $15,000. There is a fee that we have had for many years, and in the last 10 years, I do not recall the fee being raised, and that is the class due fee. And that is for $40 a student. Now, granted, you know, if you cannot pay it for a variety of reasons, working with social services or whatever, the student is not required. But that fee, which totals $160 at the end of the 4 years, basically goes for the student, you know, our spirit weeks, the 3 weeks we have. It helps offset other different events. We have been trying to do more things with the underclassmen specifically. If we wanted to have a speaker come in or something like that, that helps to offset the cost of those programs. The fee was originally put in place when those of us that have been around a long time remember the fundraising frenzy around saving money for senior year and paying for the graduation trip, which is now not, you know, that's a PTO thing. And so that fee has actually been used for not holding it all back till senior year, but to help with the, and I don't want to say co-curricular program as far as stipends or things like that, but the kind of the social emotional life of the school, if you will. You know, if we want to do different things with classes and things like that, we will turn to those fees. That being said, if the fees, which are $40 a year, are raised to $20 a year, I'm not as good in math as Mr. Rudel is, but 800 times 20 would be 16,000, which would cover the fee for the parking. Just another way to look at it. I hate all these fees, quite frankly, but I understand the position that we face.
Do we have an estimate about truing up company to be similar to the athletics fee or an increase to company?
Bill passed along, I guess, two questions. One, if we were to impose a $25 fee, and then if it were to mirror athletics of a proposed $125 fee. If it was just $25, the high school would be $2,674, assuming hardship waivers. If you also impose that on the middle school for Short Wharf, $1,093. If you were to impose a $125 fee at the high school, it'd be $13,369, assuming hardship waivers, and then $5,231 at the middle school for Short Wharf. So if you were to do both, $18,600.
So, you know, this category of revenue, and, you know, we covered this on some committee subcommittee, I recall, of the Finance Committee, and I think it came and went. And big fan of, driving for revenue. I think the beauty of the administration is that they've been able to kind of find the right places to make the revenue have a purpose. So I liked Lisa's theme, and I'd like to kind of keep that theme versus charging students. Because I think the incremental increase is not that big.
Well, I mean, everybody pays their student fee.
So the
Like
student,
regardless, like everybody pays that.
the student fees go into the student activity account, so they don't actually have an impact on the operating budget.
Right. Yeah, that's it's separate from us.
This is part of a much bigger discussion. I mean, I don't like the fees in general.
Right.
That said, as it pertains to this line item, I don't object to the $200 parking fee significantly more than I object to the $150 parking fee, right? It's kind of binary for me. Like, I either like the fee or I don't like the fee. And on one hand, all of these fees kind of seem like just a cash grab. On the other hand, it's kind of the way this world is moving for this a la carte type of way of funding things. As as corporations look to increase profits, you have airlines where you pay for a seat. If you want a bag, you pay. If you want water, you pay. If you want to choose your seat, you pay. If you want to board before someone else, you pay. It seems like schools are now following that model where, the per pupil cost gets you in the door and it gets you your books and your teacher. But if you want to participate in an activity or a play, or you want to park your car there, or you want to do a club or anything else like that. So I think if we're going to have this discussion, it needs to be a much larger discussion, fundamentally about the fee structure and why we choose to implement it and how we choose to implement it, because this is way bigger than just saying, well, let's charge an extra $50 for parking and then we make $15,000.
Yeah.
We have to be careful about where we're getting our revenue.
True.
Yeah, I also, again, I'm going to say we have been mentioning the parking for a couple weeks now, and people have heard it, but this is the first time we've mentioned the other fees, and I am really not comfortable making decisions about raising fees without being able to hear back from the people upon whom we would be placing these fees.
And
I just cannot.
And I
won't-
agree with that.
I won't be.
But I have to say,
capable of
I'm
doing that.
glad we got this information, because if we get forced to make a decision down the
Right.
line, I have to say, when you're
This-
looking
Right.
the two together, it's a number we might have to consider down the line. So I'm happy we had a chance to have the
I think this
conversation.
is creating a long list of things that we need to consider during the year and address next budget season, right?
Mhm.
I think we should start, back to the other comment, I think we should
Right.
start addressing this now, because
Right.
this is not insignificant. If you add up the increase to the athletic fee, the increase to the company fee, and the increase to the parking fee, you're talking about
50 grand.
$60,000. That all of a sudden becomes a significant number.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think we should have these discussions in committees, because, again, these are specific users who are using things that are costing the taxpayers money, and we can have conceptual discussions about this around whether, we're a public school and a government entity, and whether charging children to be using them. But tonight, I'm not sure is the night to be having these conversations.
I agree
We
with
need to move
Sarah.
on with
I
the
think
budget,
getting a
honestly.
list 48 hours before we're supposed to vote on something is not being, is not doing our due diligence, is not being fair to the public. And I think we need to do both of those things before there is any vote on those items on the list.
I'm good with that.
Yeah. Except for the cleaning contract.
Any other questions about the high school? Ellen, I know you have a theater question.
Rich, on page 138, could you just explain to me the theater receipts and how those three figures are trending? I just like to understand it better. I read it one way and then I think another way, and I'm not sure I understand.
So it's a combination of two things. So if you recall, when we made the Theater Cost Center, we talked about how we had historical revenues still sitting in the student activity accounts. So once you use that, you don't have it again. It's not a reoccurring revenue. So that's a portion of the reduction. And then ticket sales, at least for the first show, were slightly down. So that's also a contributing factor as well.
So that 13,000
Is a combination of both. But the majority of it is the historical revenue that you collected. So you only get that benefit 1 year.
Thank you.
Any other theater questions? Athletics, anything else?
Yes, I do think we need to have a discussion
On the
about,
coaches?
on the coaches. I do. I'm not sure that we can afford to be adding in 2 coaches this year. I think we can maybe have a discussion about running one of them, maybe.
Can I just ask a question for, I have the numbers for the projected athletes for cheerleading and field hockey. What are this year's numbers?
For cheerleading this year, we actually are the lowest numbers we've had in the last few years. I think it's 13 is the number. And for field hockey, we were at 34, if I remember from the last meeting when I looked it up.
Okay, so for cheerleading, you're going from 13 athletes to 30.
Well, it's 2 seasons. So the 30 there is 15
Oh,
a
it's 15
season.
and 15, okay.
And actually, that's probably a low estimate, but I'm basing it off of this year's numbers and last year's numbers.
So then if we're looking at the coaches listed for that, it's 2 per season on your schedule? And does that include this new coach?
It does, correct. They have 2 in the winter right now, and we have 1 coach in the fall, which is, the seasons are similar in length because they're both very long. The winter we put in first because that's when their competition takes place. The program has expanded over the last few years, and they actually start their competition training early in the fall season, really in September. So that coach has had to work in the fall. The assistant coach has had to be there in the fall to assist with the competition training, even without being paid.
So these athlete numbers are actually, so that 34 is actually half because they're 2 seasons?
No, this is
Field
just for
hockey's only-
cheerleading.
That's
Oh, yeah, I'm
cheerleading.
sorry.
It's
I was
just
confused.
cheerleading.
Okay. I'm like, wait, how does that work?
Field
No
hockey's
other
just
sport
Team.
is, no
I
other
think it's a
sport is
team.
2
Okay,
seasons.
I was gonna say, I didn't understand that. Okay, thank you,
Mhm.
sorry.
So just going back to what you were saying, they had been working in the past without, can you just explain that last bit?
Yeah, we hired an assistant coach a few winters ago, a couple of when it got passed in the budget. And that coach worked the next fall as well as an unpaid volunteer assistant so that they were more prepared for the upcoming winter. And then we've had it in this position in the budget for the last couple of years, and it's been getting cut. She has continued to work in that role as a volunteer, although I don't think we will keep her if that keeps up. In fact, it's not even, I don't think, I know we won't keep that coach if that keeps up. She's made that pretty clear.
So guys, how do you feel?
I know you keep asking for these, and I really, I'm looking at the numbers and the cost, and I know I keep saying next year.
But I guess this is why, if we have to have conversations
know.
about choosing safety of athletes
know.
versus a slight increase in a fee to be able to cover.
I know, but and I'm going back
having
to the
fully
year with
coached,
gymnastics, and I'm looking at the costs, and I'm thinking, with 13 students and the $4,000, and I'm thinking about that discussion we had that year with gymnastics, and I'm just running that through in my mind, and I'm thinking this is an assistant, and
Mark, are there any local colleges or universities that we could reach out to try and capture some of their talent as far as in the context of an internship program? So instead of having a paid assistant coach on our staff, can we reach out to the local universities who have, people who are well versed in the area or considering or studying, athletics or athletic administration or something like that, and get them some internship experience or something like that?
The person who's studying athletic administration isn't going to be able to help our cheerleaders with tumbling and stunting and choreography. And that's what this person does.
We also-
I'm
we-
speaking more globally
yeah.
as far as the
Yeah, we
assistant
have an
coach
HR issue, too,
staffing
so-
across.
And I would also say, Dan, on the, at least on the youth sports level, sometimes they try to get college kids to assist during season, and what happens is it's their season. So they're busy with their practices and they can't help
Louis
out.
can speak.
The other piece of that, too, is that to be a high school coach in the state of Connecticut, you have to be certified by the State Department of Education. So there's a 45 clock-hour coaching course that they have to take. There's CPR first aid. There's a concussion module that all our coaches have to take and stay current on. There are CEUs that, even though teachers don't need them anymore, continuing education units, coaches still need certain hours of CEUs every year. And it's very difficult to get someone to volunteer when all of that is being asked of them up front. So there's a lot of money up front that they have to put into it in order to pull it, in order to be a coach.
So you're saying the answer to my question is no?
Well, it's not a no, because we do have volunteers in our program, and we do get some
But Lewis has the
from
answer.
colleges.
It's a negotiated stipend.
Well, it's not.
I could have just answered that like 2 minutes ago. Mark's absolutely right in everything you said. More simple answer is no. The problem is that we do have, quote, volunteers who sometimes are paid by outside organizations, like the Diamond Club or the Gridiron Club or the Booster Club or whomever, which is a whole other discussion we can have on another day. The problem is that those assistant coaching positions are stipended positions and negotiated with the WTA. The more volunteers you bring in and interns, the more likely you are to have a prohibited practice with regard to their contract. Even if we hire someone who's not a member of the WTA, we are required to pay the amount in the WTA contract. That's come up in negotiations. It's an issue that is solidified in the contract.
So then how do we have it, because right now we have an assistant cheerleading coach who's on a volunteer basis, so how do we have that?
We do, and that's the discussion I would rather have in a collective bargaining context.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I was
Thank you.
wondering what happens in the case that she's, or the situation, what happens to the cheerleading team, or what's the consequence?
Well, we would have to search for another person who might be willing to volunteer some time
Okay.
and have the level of expertise that we're getting right now. We do, the cheerleaders already pay for stunting, extra help with stunting and for safety reasons and tumbling and some of the extra items that they do that they need for competition. So they bring people in for that, and some of that comes out of the parents' pockets. Some of that comes out of a donation they received that from someone who was going out of the program that they've been using, and some of it is in the athletic budget as well. So, but that would be what we would need to do to try and continue this program growing in the way it's competing, the way it has over the last number of years.
So just trying to get a consensus from the board about how you feel about the coaches?
I think it falls under the same kind of category that we talked about earlier. I mean, I think it's, we made a commitment several years ago to add assistant coaches and to create that kind of balance between the different sports. We may end up coming back to that and eliminating it, but to not continue on that commitment and to do so now is just looking at it from a budgetary standpoint and not taking a look at it more holistically. So I mean, I'm all for going back and taking a look at our athletics program and the structure of the coaching, but to say no to these two requests when we've funded every other assistant coach position and actually said that that was something we're going to do, and Mark staggered it over the course of the years, and then factor in that it's a safety issue, I don't think we should be talking about it tonight.
I think there's a difference between field hockey and cheerleading. It's the
Yeah.
contact sport issue in my mind.
Which one?
Field hockey.
I'm pretty sure cheerleading is a contact sport too. I
I
mean,
think
It's also 34 athletes as opposed to 13.
It's similar to the courses that high school, like 7 people in a class or whatnot, 7 students in a class. And I guess it's, they clearly care about what they're trying to do.
Yep. But they're both important teams. No one's arguing that they have coaches. I'm just struggling with, no one likes having these discussions, and I'm thinking back to when we did the gymnastics discussion, and nobody likes having these conversations.
I remember that gymnastics conversation. Uh-huh.
Yeah. But that's what we have to
Yeah,
do.
if you had to
It's-
pick one, go with the.
And I don't know that we have to pick one.
Poppy.
I mean, that's what we're deciding, is do we,
I don't think you could pick one over
I
the
don't
other.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I mean,
Well, I think it's.
but this is the third year.
They've been postponed for a few years now.
I believe, and I could check, but I believe 2016 was the first year it was proposed. So yeah, this would be the third year for both of these positions. And to be fair, I think one of those years, there might have been 3 or 4 assistants, and they were one of those 3 or 4, and 2 got in and 2 didn't, I believe. Again, I have all the pasts, so I could check, but the other years, they were standalone, including last year.
I think from a safety standpoint of the athletes, particularly with these 2 sports and the concerns, I would leave them.
I just don't think we have the certainty to decide
Yeah.
to eliminate it right now. So, I mean,
It's true.
No.
Yeah, I would be inclined to put it off another year, but I'm not, it sounds like I'm probably in the minority here, so. That said, because these are the last of the contact sports, I will telegraph the fact that I'm not sure we can afford to be going to the non-contact sports tier at this sort of stage in our
That goes back
budgeting.
to the discussion about the
But listen, we
fees.
need to
Yeah.
start having that discussion with Dan's other discussions, unfortunately, so,
agreed.
all right.
Right.
All right, so.
Thanks, Mark.
If I could just make one other quick point, as you consider deliberating all of this, you talked about what it would be if you put the parking fee, raise the athletic fee, and raise the company fee. My concern with that is you're really hitting the same constituents with 2 separate fees at the same
Exactly.
time.
Oh, it was an either or.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Someone had
we-
mentioned the dollar amount if you put
No.
all the fees in,
Right.
so
No,
I just.
company and athletics.
Okay.
Because to your point, Mark, there should be
It is
parity.
it's the
There
company
should
and
be
the
parity.
athletes and
That was
that
the one
are
that you put together.
usually
Mark,
after
and to be
school.
clear, that wasn't a suggestion that we do it. It was just a description of how large the numbers became
Right.
when you looked at them in aggregate,
Okay,
and that it's a significant amount of money and needs to be discussed as such.
thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Special education? Tony, do you want to take the lead?
This is one that I think we've had a lot of discussions about, and I know that it's going to generate a lot of discussion as well. But when we look at our out-of-placement tuition this year,
What page, Tony, just so everybody can quickly
just
find
go to
it?
154.
Okay.
So we're going to be at about 3 million. The estimate now, the latest one is 3,033,000, if I remember correctly, versus a 2.651 budget, which is historically probably the smallest overage we've had forever. And just keeping in what I'm trying to do as I look at these categories is try to really hit that 87% bucket that we talked about before without really impacting programs. And one of the things that I think we should be able to do here and be comfortable with is try to not project too much on what the costs are going to be next year, but to try to basically say, all right, let's use this year's cost as the budgeted item and then play through, because we know that it's going to be variable. It can be all over the map, and we know that if there's going to be, if we're off by a lot, we've done this historically, going back and gotten a special appropriation from the town. So my proposal would be, both on the legal fees and on the out-of-district tuition estimate, to basically make it what we think this year's spend is going to be, which is like 3 million instead of the, 3,033,000 instead of 3.1, and to make legal 115,000 instead of the 150,000.
So in terms of the tuition,
Yeah.
the agreements aren't flat dollar amounts. They don't carry forward year to year at the exact same amount.
Right.
So when we build the budget, we build it at what those actual agreements call for, including the increase. In terms of like the allowance that we have, I mean, Mike can maybe speak to it, but we have some that may potentially
Right.
hit before the end of this fiscal year. In terms of legal fees, we did get the December bill. It was much higher than anticipated, so I don't think that 115 will hold anymore.
My view is that, if we're looking at reductions, this is a place where we can play through. And I don't know how other board members feel about it. I'd like to get their opinion about it.
So the only thing I would also say is it is an area that impacts everything. So if we look at the past few years when we've had these shortfalls, we freeze accounts. That has an impact. We defer hiring people. If we have a vacant position, that has an impact. This has been an area that has impacted every school, every cost center for at least the last 3 years. So when we look at saying, possibly paring back, whether it be the legal fees or the tuition, when that hits and they hit, they have an impact across the board.
Sure.
And
So
maybe
I
that's-
would have,
Okay.
I would underscore what Rich just expressed. And generally, this is an area that if we're seeing a trend that's approaching, 150, then reducing it to something that we were doing last year is, we're gonna go over it.
Correct.
So,
But I don't think we are hitting
So
150.
do you feel the same? So are you
I-
taking that approach with the legal fees and the tuition, or just the legal fees? What's your
I
take
think we're
on it?
talking about the legal fees first off.
Okay.
And then on the tuition, budgeting in this area has always been a challenge for us. You're modifying it maybe, or the suggestion is that to modify it, maybe, $1 million minus 3.3 is what?
So I mean, in terms of the
Some
in terms of the legal fees, well, we feel the 150,000 is probably the appropriate number based on the type of work that has to be done, the file reviews that have to be done, the planning and placement team work that has to be done. We could conceivably bring that down to 135. I think the estimate for this year, rather than being 115 based on the December bill, will probably be closer to 125. But there's a lot of fluctuation in those bills. If we see a spike in January or February, that 125 is probably not going to hold.
Yeah.
So one of the items on the list of 17 was a reduction of $15,000 in legal fees.
But even in our
Guys,
current
guys, wait a minute.
financial.
I know Mike.
If I could,
Mike's-
I appreciate the questions. I think they're very valid. This is the most volatile area within perhaps the entire budget, but certainly within the special education aspects. I would not recommend changing the projections for the out-of-district tuition at this time. We are in a place now where we are making progress, but we are not there yet. And I think we need to put ourselves in a position as a district to be able to make decisions based on what students need and knowing the history of these accounts and looking at continuing to get out of the hole that we were in last year. I think we're getting there, but it will be a process. Regarding the legal fees and the representation, frankly, I believe that account was underutilized in the past, and I do believe that in order to put ourselves in a position to appropriately respond to the concerns that are raised, rightfully so. I mean, that is certainly people's rights, and we understand that, and we explain that, and we work with people through that process. But when it happens, we need to have the appropriate resources to respond. To not do that, knowing that it's, likely to happen, I don't think it's a good recommendation. Rich and I have closely monitored. That's why that number is on that cut list, and we will continue to do that. But I don't. I would love to be at a point when we could play through, and that is my goal. I really don't believe we're there yet.
I would agree. I would agree.
Mike, can I ask a question? The 3.1 million that's proposed for fiscal '20, it's the highest it's ever been. Is that because the number of students for outplacement is increasing, or the cost of the institution which they are going to is increasing.
Well, it does incorporate, that number does incorporate, and Rich will tell me if I'm wrong, it does incorporate for inflation on current placements. We did budget to the student, so when we are aware of it, it was included for next year. There are some placements that we're aware of. We looked at those, we projected the inflation rate, and that's in there. The number changes frequently. I mean, I was in conversations today where it might add to that number. So it's based, at the time when we created this, to the student, built from zero.
Are you seeing that number over the past how are you seeing that number change over the past 5 years? Up, down?
Well, I haven't analyzed, I haven't been involved in all those decisions over the past 5 years. I can tell you that trend-wise, and I was talking about this with colleagues over email today, trend-wise, people are concerned about the rising not only costs and numbers of placements, and that's from all the surrounding districts. Again, we want to be in a place where we can meet the needs of the students that we're servicing, whether it be in district or having to put them in a special education school where they can make the appropriate progress.
Mike, or Rich, the number that's proposed includes known obligations plus any percentage increase on that, and how many unanticipated?
4.
And 4 unanticipated, for how much?
95,000 per.
Okay. So,
4 at 95?
yeah.
So I'm gonna have to say cut it back to 3 then, because to go with Tony on that one, we've trued up our number. We've been underestimating every year.
So
This year we're estimating much closer to where we
So
are.
that's incorrect.
Okay.
We
Well,
budget to the
it's been
person.
cut.
We
It's
budget
been
to the
cutting. It's
person.
been cut.
So we're not underestimating. What we underestimated was that allowance.
Right.
So we have never,
Right.
in the last 6 years, had
Right.
less
Yes.
than
I'm
3
sorry. Yes.
Unanticipated
Yes, yes, I'm
settlements.
sorry.
It's never happened. It's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why
Yeah.
in fiscal 19 we brought it up to 4.
Right.
Even 4 is actually low if we look historically at how that account has trended.
Right.
So we're not actually, bringing it down would be under budgeting.
Yeah, but
So
you-
I think we're playing with numbers here more so than,
Our numbers are nice and flat.
I think we're trying to play with numbers here, and we shouldn't, in my view, because we've seen the last couple of years retract, expand.
Catch up.
Exactly, and this is a very volatile area. Maybe the wish one day is that it actually is an account that provides funds to a different area. But I think, this is an operating finesse that needs to be, we've been very good about monitoring this account. And I think, both Rich with Mike who's new, I think we've been feeling stronger about this category. So I would actually just recommend keeping it as is.
And if I may add, this is almost the exact conversation we had last year around 3 versus 4. And we can give the history there in the sense of how soon that 4 disappeared, even before the budget was finally approved. I would also say, as the Finance Committee knows for sure, because you've had monthly updates from Rich and Mike, this is the best knowledge we've had in a long time. Again, that's too much work in the past for too few people, but the advantage of the stronger administrative oversight is that known number, the adjustments on that, that's as solid as we've been, as accurate as we've been in recent time, which to me means we're that much more understanding of why we need the 4. And you may want to just review the history, because we had this exact conversation last year.
So we did have this conversation last year, and there was a desire to bring that allowance for unanticipated placements down. The board ended up not doing it. That allowance was used before we even got to referendum.
that was
So
gonna be
when
my
Mike walked in the
question.
door,
Where are
we
we?
had 0 available.
Where are we as far as available now? Because this number was developed several months ago. Where are we with
It could potentially go down in the next month.
Yeah, but- so,
2, 3, or like?
but Rich, to that
3
point,
or-
but this is the first year, I'm gonna, correct me if I'm wrong, but just my interpretation of the numbers is, or maybe not, every other year prior to this one, as long as you've been here, was our number, our budgeted number, constructed by taking the amount of known expenses and then adding in X number of outplacements? Because we've been off by so much, with the exception of last year.
So I can speak for, well, we were here, we look at who we know are outplaced, how long those agreements go out for, and we look at historically how many students have either been unilaterally placed or outplaced.
Okay.
And we look at the cost of largely the places that we outplace them, and that's where that allowance is built. We've never had a year when nobody's actually been outplaced or unilaterally placed, ever.
Okay, so I have two comments on this. The first is, you know, Mike, you said something, and I appreciate that you addressed the issue, because here's going to be the narrative, if not in this room, in the room of other boards in town, which is they're going to say, last year you increased your budgeting to try and get it to reflect a more accurate representation of what your actual spend is. You also increased your staffing, your professional development. Why are we still budgeting for more? So I appreciate when you say that we're getting there, but we're not there yet, because that puts some context to this. I'm sorry.
I mean,
I'm sorry, I had something else. So that's okay. So my challenge, Rich, is something that you said. And I think this is a fundamental problem that we need to look at, because it may be what's polarizing the community and the population in this district. And that is, and this is an objection I've had for a while, and that is, as soon as we run over in what Mike said is probably the most tumultuous line item in our entire budget, as soon as we run over, we look to other areas for cost savings. We skimp on facilities. We freeze teachers' budgets. We freeze administrative budgets. We freeze purchasing budgets. And that, you know, we heard it with Mark when he said, okay, well, if you're going to raise athletic fees, you should look at company too. It creates an automatic us versus them. I would propose that we be a little more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but a little leaner on our budgeting, but not automatically go to trying to offset by foregoing maintenance for another year on something that's tied together with string, or cutting or freezing building budgets or anything else like that. I'm for bringing the number in next year's budget down to the actual spend, with the caveat that we don't start doing these line item transfers and rob Peter to pay Paul, that we go, as soon as we receive an overage in this area, that we go for a supplemental appropriation and keep the money true, because that's going to reduce the us versus them mentality, which is part of the problem that we have when budgeting for this.
So you would be going for supplementals multiple times a year. And in addition to that, there have been multiple statements by members of the Board of Finance that we expect you to be able to come up with at least a portion of this amount to be able to show that you can cover
that's
a
what I was
portion
gonna
of that amount, which is largely why we freeze accounts, we defer projects, we freeze vacant positions. It's not a complete, well, you have an overage, here's some money.
Right, well, you know, that speaks to the need to have a more, and it's certainly going to happen during this budget process, a more, because I've witnessed those statements being made by isolated Board of Finance members, but until we get that is the position of the Board of Finance, you know, if that's going to be the case, I mean, we can be as combative as we want, right? And we could budget for 8 additional outplacements and say, but,
Yeah,
I
Dan,
mean, we don't want to go there.
Yeah, no, Dan, I appreciate the thoughtfulness with that line of thought, but I think the Board of Finance has historically been abundantly clear that there is an expectation that we try to cover our overages before we come
Right, but
to them.
we're now seeing the results of
Right,
that as
but-
we have
Let-
boilers that are
let-
failing.
let Bill-
Let me ask a clarifying question of Mike. In terms of that additional 4, up until that number, it's all known situations, known relationships, with some prediction for a possible outplacement or not? Is it all, do you see what I'm asking? Meaning, is that 4, I'll put it another way.
Yeah.
My interpretation of how important that 4 is against a base of due 9% against 2,300 students is that this is an area by ethical and moral and legal obligation. If a child's in crisis, and we cannot meet those needs within district, and that crisis could emerge rapidly with an IDA-identified child, we have to respond. If we can't do it within district, then it's the out-of-district placement. My understanding of this and do that, my math for me, is that is an incredibly narrow margin, given this is rightly so, we are dealing with a set of students have a different set of support needs and all the rest, and that's what that 4 does for us, which is in many ways incredibly slim and narrow relative to what may emerge. Am I explaining
No.
this accurately?
No, I agree with that. That's accurate. And there's tremendous fluctuation in what is known, and even students, for example, who are known and who are currently placed out may need additional resources in those placements that, even though they're known now, they can increase above and beyond that. So there's a lot of variables. It's based on student needs. We of course meet all of the needs of our students, and we want to make sure that the appropriate resources are there. Rich and I have looked at this. I've asked the same question to Rich, and we've talked about this, and this is where the recommendation landed. And I think
So
based on the history, it's
4 would be 300 at 95. 380, right? Yeah, I still believe that from a budgetary point of view, that we could make a small reduction here, that it doesn't really, rather than making reductions that really where we know the known outcome that's affecting the program, right? We have one here that we may have to, after the fact, have true ups and go to town, but it's one that is, gives us a little bit of leeway in the budget, doesn't really affect the program, and we have the opportunity down the road to true this up. That was
So-
really it.
I guess if I may, again, this is one where we've brought within the administration brought the best thinking to bear we can do. You've got the best individual in that seat now, and Mike Rizzo around, and we now are managing with incredible care and detail on the known elements. That's why I asked the question I did in terms of what we know and understand, because frankly, in the past, we have not been as sharp on that as we should have been, which explains these overages. And we are working this as closely as we can. But in deference to the children in this district, we then, within matters of a couple weeks, we sometimes have to be able to respond.
Sure.
And it's a totally different set of decisions and processes relative to any of our other students. And this is why, across the districts, the word volatile could be insulting to a SPED family. It's not meant that way. It's meant that things are happening. I'm not saying...
This has nothing to do with our obligation. This
no,
is...
but my point is, here's my point.
Yeah.
We have very strong understanding of why that 4 is so important. And if you pull back there, my strong hunch is that we will quickly be having effects across the rest of the budget in ways you don't want to have, because we will have to start doing again the things we've been doing. That's what we're trying to prevent against.
Right. So maybe to underscore that, and I think we're playing with numbers here too much, because I think if, as I mentioned earlier, just we're doing finance for its own budgeting sake. I think the beauty of what we have now is that we have more rigor in this process. We didn't have that before.
Much more.
And so I kind of want to see, is this going to stick?
Exactly.
Okay, because
Maybe.
now that we have the brain trust around figuring this out, and we need to figure it out because it cannot blow up like it did before, let's test this. Let's give this a run and see whether we're able to get our arms around the belts and suspenders on making this known, because this has to be as close to known as we can get it, because we know it. So that's why I think the fundamentals of the way this was constructed, the assumptions are here. And so that's why I think we should take it for what it is.
So what I'm hearing is you guys really do feel like you want to see how this plays out this year with the 4. All right, then I'm gonna throw out there that I was waffling on the BCBA clinical supervision piece, because I loved the ask. I loved how you built it, particularly with the additional para-education going into it. I loved that. I mean, I really did. But I'm probably going to suggest, if we aren't going to be able to shave off of the budget in that area, that we wait till next year for that ask. I really liked it, but I'm not sure that it's, I think it is something that we could potentially wait for, and I'm throwing that out for discussion. If we can't move on the other two pieces as much, that maybe we need to have a discussion on that one. I hadn't wanted to as much, but I think that our programs will work this year without it.
There's nothing comparable in the pots of money.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to be penny wise and pound foolish, and
well,
That's my
and
thought,
pull
because
back
I'm
on
not sure,
and
you
pull
know,
back on
Guys,
professional development for our
Guys, time out, 1
BCBAs.
second, guys, time out. I would like to turn to Mike
Okay.
and have him talk about briefly what the benefit of the clinical supervision for the BCBAs, what we anticipate that to be from supporting our children and ultimately financial.
Sure. So the idea, again, is that by building the capacity of those BCBAs and providing that highly technical supervision, we will be able to better meet the needs of really our most complex students in this district. These are our most significantly, the students with the most significant disabilities. And by providing that service to the BCBAs, they can better service those students. These are the students that, you know, if you ever could predict students that may need more services, perhaps outside of this district, this is the group that could be in that category because of the level of need that they have. By providing that capacity building to our team, we can deliver those services with higher quality within the district. In addition to that, part of this process would include working with our paraprofessionals. Our paraprofessionals spend a tremendous amount of time. They do very, very important work with our students on the ground every single day. By building their capacity, we are really giving everyone on the entire team more capacity. And then hopefully we also offer within this district, we have students who are benefiting and requiring programs in their home partially because of their needs. By building the capacity of our BCBAs, we may be able to use some of our own staff to help deliver those programs and not have to rely on some of the contracted services that we have had in the past. So the investment in that specific skill is really, supervision rather, is really targeted to hit a lot of areas strongly.
And are we building capacity for other avenues of work with students when they are not interested in BCBA work? If, I know that
What do you mean not interested? Can you
if
just
they
clarify?
perhaps object to that sort of type of intervention.
Well, that's a really good question. You know, the idea, sort of the traditional view of a board-certified behavior analyst may be more restrictive than what the actual, how they actually work within a school setting. Some envision BCBA as somebody who is doing very discrete instruction, tabletop, one-on-one, repetitive instruction, and that is part of what a BCBA can do effectively. However, in a school setting, BCBAs take on a much larger and more significant role. For example, students who are experiencing behavioral dysregulation, they can work with regular education teachers to help modify those behaviors in a behavioral way that is much less restrictive and looser than what a traditional view of a BCBA might be. So by applying the principles of behavior to a variety of situations and across all ages, you can really see change with students that allows them to continue with success in a regular education classroom.
I mean, my opinion on this is we could be penny wise and pound foolish with the return that we would get with this investment, in my opinion.
Agreed.
So I respect the fact that this is important to you. You wouldn't have brought it up if it wasn't, but that's not a cut that I would support. I don't know how others feel, but.
How do we,
Okay. My question for Rich is, has there been a year where we've had fewer than 4 unanticipated placements? We're budgeting for 4. Has there been a year where we've had fewer than 4?
Not at least in the last 5.
Okay, I've got to say, Tony, my thinking was along the lines of yours, that this was possibly an area in which we could shore up a little bit.
Yeah.
But my thinking's changed, and I think, you know, hearing what Jacqueline said, which I think was right on point, hearing Mike and Rich speak about that, I think we should look elsewhere. I think we should leave.
Even the legal fees, you
No,
think?
The legal fees, they've said that conservatively, we could adjust by $15,000.
We should do that.
Yep, I think that's fine.
I don't know what I need.
Yeah,
Anything else for special ed?
No,
That was
I
those.
still think we're
I think it might-
we're applying science to
Yep.
an
Yeah,
area
I have-
where we can
Gina,
get some dollars back.
I
but
have
whatever.
I have something to say on that, because I want to be very clear. You know, Bill said earlier, this is a public meeting, and so I want to be very, very clear. In no way, and I'll speak for myself and others can chime in no way does my questioning the way we allocate funds for these areas indicate my feelings towards any of our students or our obligation, both legally, morally, ethically, whatever the case may be, to make sure that we are serving the needs of all our students. That is 100% guaranteed in my mind. The only reason why I ask questions is I have process questions about the way we go about meeting these obligations, but at no point in time am I ever suggesting that we should compromise on any of these services that we provide to, as you said, some of our most dynamic learners.
I think everybody concurs with that.
I, just being in this chair for only 3.5 weeks, so I don't have as much rich history as you guys have in terms of the dialogue last year, et cetera. I just put myself in the shoes of a neighbor. And when that neighbor looks at this number as a $9.3 million department, I think we owe it to the community just to level set with them on how big this department should be. Because we are now in the second year of increase in this department. Again, no disrespect to any family, any of the services, et cetera. I just don't know, and I don't think the community knows, how big should this area be? Are we baseline at $9 million? Are we, are we above average versus our other, neighboring districts? I think we owe it to them. Otherwise,
Ruby,
no
let
one
me-
has an
Yeah,
idea.
Ruby, let me say something here. A district not too far away from here got itself in a whole lot of legal trouble by reading the discussion. I know you're not
Yeah.
doing this, and you're a board member, but you cannot go into these conversations based on dollar first.
That's right.
A district not too far from here ran into, and is still working through it, and one of the best districts in the country, ran into very severe legal jeopardy. Superintendent lost their job because the conversations from the board level were substantially around, let's talk dollars first, services second. And some of that then privately away from the board colored the nature of work. We have to start with services first because there's an ethical, moral, and I know you know this, I just need to put this in the public record. Moral, ethical, and legal, and work like crazy to provide the best needs at the most efficient dollar possible. I just want to be cautious here because it's it's an area where there's a whole set of other decision factors as we try and meet those individual needs. So I know you come with a very big heart on this, great dedication. I just want to have in the public record, and that at least for the superintendent I stand and the team stands, that it's the needs of those students first, morally, ethically, and legally, and then we work like crazy to really have those needs met as effectively and efficiently as possible. I don't know, Mike, if you want to add anything to that. It's just a very significant
Yeah.
issue.
I
And
think
it's a
that-
great struggle all over. I mean, we're at roughly 23%, which compares very favorably in that regard, but it's the work we have to focus on.
Yeah, and I think the questions that I led were really more about the process of financial forecasting rather
yep.
than anything else, because it is,
Yeah.
we've been through it, we've been in the discussions, it's a really tough number to pin down from a forecasting perspective, and so it's really important that we push that as hard as possible to make sure that we have the best forecast we can. And if we can, because there's a lot of variability in these numbers, it's just a good discussion to have to really talk a little bit about what it takes to really try to get the best forecast possible.
I would just say, I think we've seen a tremendous process improvement.
Yeah. I'd also
Yeah,
like
of
to say
course.
something to Mike,
So,
that
I mean, I think we.
everyone else is used to me on here, and I just want to make sure that you know that I really, when I'm asking questions, particularly because this was my first career, I appreciate what you do, and I'm not questioning you in any way. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do for the people I'm representing, because and so that it's not, I'm not questioning any of the things that you've put forward at all. I really am not. I think you're doing an outstanding job. And so I just want to make sure, because everybody else knows that I hate doing this part of the budget because it doesn't feel good, but so just wanted to make sure that you know that.
Understood, thank you.
All right, so within special ed, there's consensus on the 15,000 for the legal
Yeah.
fees. Anything else?
No.
Pupil
I
services?
just picked it like long enough. Wait a minute, is that?
Pupil services.
No, I think we're in.
Anything within curriculum and instruction?
Where was CABE? Is that?
It's coming.
Okay.
That's coming, I believe. It's in district admin, I think. Digital learning and technology?
I think we are probably, when we circle back to Dan's conversations we need to have, I think we may need to have some conversations about just sort of replenishment cycles and how we can, with Google
Yeah,
with their crazy
Yeah, I
Chromebook
mean, particularly we have that
cutoffs,
big
and maybe
blip
if we
in
start
about
shifting
3
to Apple
years.
or
The
something.
big blip in 3 years. I think we need to
Yeah.
put that on a planning
Yeah.
agenda as far as how we are
got
going
that
to.
So
big
we,
cliff
we
coming.
typically have tried to put it on a planning agenda, and then budget
the
reductions
money
take
somewhere
that
else,
budget,
yeah.
that planning agenda and throw it out the window.
Well, I mean, but that's a significant thing. But any other specifics about tech? District admin?
I
Yeah,
think
this
I
is
do
us.
have-
Yeah, that's.
I think
I'd like to propose a cut.
I
You wanna do it?
actually, well, the CABE? Yeah, I'm going to suggest that we are looking at everything so closely this year, and as much as it has some benefits for advocacy and education, whatever, I'm not sure that we can justify spending the money on CABE this year as a board. I just feel like perhaps there are resources for us online for our new members, and that this year, given what we're asking everybody else to do, it is just not okay for us to be spending that money.
This is CABE
know.
membership.
Yes.
So the access to CABE training is still available.
Well, then
as
I
a
double say, I don't think
as
we
a
can spend this
non-member
money.
district, am I
This-
correct? Bill?
I'm not actually sure about that if you're not a member,
I
Well,
think you
I
can
think we
pay.
have other resources that we can go to, because quite frankly, we're asking everybody to give up an awful lot here, and I just don't see how we can in good conscience be paying that membership fee this year.
I agree.
He deletes them. Tony's like, oh yeah.
I'm fine with that.
I
believe
mean,
it.
the only thing to consider would be, I mean, it was brought up, I've done no research on this, and it's really more, I think, a chair issue, is especially with a change in leadership in Hartford, CABE does perform within the bounds of the law an appropriate lobbying function, and that is something to keep an eye on. So, I mean, Weston, while a small district, is seen as one of the leading districts in the state, and if Weston were to be stepping out of CABE, I think you'd want to be ready for what that might mean to some of your sister and brother districts and boards
And-
at this point. For example, and it may be something Weston says immaterial. I know in general how Fairfield County tends to feel about Hartford. I know how we feel in terms of the proportion of dollar going up there relative to services for most of the communities down here, but most of the other area districts still are part of CABE, and there is a change in leadership. There is, and that would be the only thing to think through.
We do have state senators that I think we should maybe lean on a bit more heavily in this time. I just feel like we're asking our administrators and people to give
No,
up a lot in
I
this
know,
budget
I,
bill.
I understand that, but this is one where, I mean, I even thought, like, we're asking everybody else to give up, that should be on the block. But I think the lobbying in Hartford, and while we can reach out to local legislators, I think there is some power in numbers in trying to get things done. And I have to say, with the bill that we just found out about today, talking about regionalization of school districts that would impact us, I think CABE will be an ally in battling that. And
I think that Senator Wong and Haskell and Rep.
But I think if a lot of districts drop out, we
I
could
still
be in a situation where we
severely
cripple
impacts.
an organization
I-
that exists solely
I
to
understand what
support
you're saying, but I
education.
just feel like given what we're asking all of the administrators in the schools to give up this year, I'm not comfortable paying for this. I'm just
Okay.
not. That's me.
But there's 7
There's 7 of us.
I agree with Sarah.
This is a bit of a, kind of like an exercise in game theory, right? So if we choose.
budget is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
But
gonna say,
this more so
what's-
because if we choose to drop out of CABE, but other districts don't, then we still reap most of the rewards that we get from CABE. Because, you know, CABE has their policy services, but we have Shipman and Goodwin and we have Lewis, so we don't really rely on CABE policy services that much. But, you know, arguably, CABE is on top of every piece. For those who like to be put to sleep, you could read the legislative updates, and they go into, they address every single piece of legislation that even remotely pertains to children, schools, education, anything else like that. So if we drop out, but none of the other districts do, then we continue to benefit from the work that CABE is doing without actually having to pay for it. But if it reaches a critical mass of districts that choose not to pay for this, then all of a sudden that might go away, and
We
So-
could join again, right?
We've done this in the past. We've
Yeah.
dropped out for economic reasons once before. And the discussion on the board level was that it is an agency that exists solely for the support of us as boards of education. And without that, were we at a disadvantage, and we joined again. So playing devil's advocate, I'll throw that out there.
We'll probably join again.
Jacqueline, you're neutral. Dan, you're a definite yes.
no, I'm not.
I mean,
I actually think I might be a neutral. I mean, there's compelling arguments to both sides of it. There's compelling arguments to both sides of it. I mean, I just think I made a pretty strong case for staying in CABE, but, I mean, I can make a pretty strong case for dropping out of CABE. We're at 4.32. Something's got to give. So,
And having said that, if we choose to pull out for this year, I would hope that you would reach out as chair to them and talk to them about it and
Yeah.
see what else might be possible in terms of a relationship with them.
yeah.
I mean, reluctantly, I'd have to say that I support dropping it this year from this budget.
I think we could evaluate and see what happens. It's not like we're out forever. Right.
Ellen, you've been through this a few times before. What's your view?
I think, I think we have the conversation with them.
Yeah.
Tell them that, we're
Yeah.
up against a wall and we need
Yeah.
to find some spot. They're gonna understand it, they've heard it,
Yeah.
and they're hearing it again.
Mhm.
But I think there is a way to reinvent the relationship, and I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
up to Gina.
Yeah. I'm fine with that.
Now, let me ask the parallel, because the CAPS membership, I would not recommend.
I would
No,
not
no,
recommend
you
either.
need to stay in
the-
that.
You
the-
might say that.
And especially now with a very new, vibrant leader of CAPS, who's working extra hard to be a presence,
And I would,
the signaling there would be highly problematic if we were to pull back.
yeah, I don't support any other, I don't support
no.
Rich's
No, you guys-
pulling
yeah.
out of his organization,
guys-
and I don't support pulling out of CES.
No.
Yeah.
And I mean, the signaling of, because I know amongst my fellow superintendents, we're increasingly nervous about, and this is not a partisan statement, we're just nervous about new energy to legislate down upon the districts. And you saw an example today, you saw, I don't know if that's going to go anywhere, frankly, you saw another one around some curricular adjustments in terms of climate change. We already deal with climate change, but, so there's a set of my fellow supers who
Yeah.
would just say, this is the time we need to be that much more active. So as long as you're comfortable with
Oh, yeah.
that would stay at the 4,100, whereas you would be dropping out. And I would just echo Ellen's point, Gina, I think you need to reach out to just help them understand, because, we are a very visible district. So I think you want to have people understand.
Yeah.
Yep.
Agreed.
Agreed.
In the same area, Bill, you have an increase of 7,500 for super consultants for your initiatives?
That's to give us flexibility, and Rich and I have talked a lot about this, because conceivably that was something we were going to zero out. We decided not to at this point, because, for example, right now, we're over budget by 24,000 for the Phase 2 feasibility study. If we'd had these sorts of funds, conceivably that would have been part of where we would have gone. If we do anything on school start end time, you do need to occasionally get external help. We've not been drawing on that area the last couple of years, but we thought we would need to have some of that flexibility. Again, that might be an area you could zero out or cut back, but Rich and I have talked about that, and our concern is we'd have some things coming at us, we'd have to find money elsewhere.
So in this year alone, you spent $35,000 in that area. All of that were unbudgeted expenses that had to come up. As Bill mentioned, you know, your school.
Is the bulk of that the 24,000?
24,000 of the 35,000 is the phase 2 study.
Everybody good with that?
Well, I mean, if, could we reduce it maybe, a little, like maybe to 5,000, or, I just.
Well, it's, you mean take 15,000 out? The increase is 75. The
100,
budget
yeah.
request is 20,
Wait.
right?
No, the budget request is 17.5. In the account is employment screening.
Right, so
Oh,
this
can't
is,
really-
this is, the
Sorry, sorry.
7,500 is
Yeah,
for
yeah.
his, is for the flex, and I'm thinking maybe just cut it down to like, say, 5,000 for the flex, just shave it down. I just sort of feel like if we could, I don't know, this was one of the things in the front of the book that I thought, in the front of the book, we should fix the front of the book, because the front of the book, this is one of the things says is gone, actually.
Or was it, if they could add more,
Right,
this
so
was one of the things
but
that
so
they would
just
add.
shave it down a
Yeah.
little, or I don't know. Or, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter, I guess we could just leave it if you need it, I don't,
Well, the increase is 7,500.
right. What's new?
What?
It's new because they have, they don't have it because
Right.
they need it
Right.
for flexibility, so it's a new thing, so it's like we.
How much do you really need? I mean, you need.
Well,
I don't
I
know,
mean,
it's
The
new.
I mean,
It's
I
new.
guess the issue is, Tony, we know we spent 24,000 this year on the feasibility. Where are we going with that?
Well, that probably should have come out for a special, like, we didn't
So,
vote on
I
that.
mean,
We didn't
that's-
vote on that, which is a little, kind of uncomfortable with
No,
that,
you
right?
did-
I mean,
you-
we
you
should
did-
have budgeted that
No,
down.
that was discussed, and
Yeah, I know.
that amount was certainly discussed.
No, I know, but I'm just saying
I-
that maybe should have been like a.
I mean,
Separately anyway.
I mean, this, in the larger issues you may face as a board in the next
This is
couple of
nothing.
months, this is small ball.
Oh, I know, this is not.
And, you know, so I think the reason, and Rich and I were scouring as to and we talked about pulling it back down. We could pull it back down, but we're trying to find a little flex, because, for example, you're in a Phase 2 study. We had not budgeted for that, but certain needs will emerge. And most of you know, in organizations of this size, you get these needs that come up where you need that help. Could pull it back down some. I'm fine with that. I just as long as our eyes are wide open, that witness this year, we had a need that, couldn't cover. I'm at this point flexible on this, just to help keep you moving.
I mean, we're pulling back on real things. I mean, something that's an unknown that has a flex, I mean, I don't know what the justification is for keeping that as a budget item. I mean, I don't.
So you're recommending that number, or are you asking them to come up with?
No, I want to get a sense of how others feel about it.
It's confusing if we are using this money out of different line items to flex and service other areas.
No, it'd be used, if we have technical needs at district-wide level, technical advice, that we had not anticipated, such as the Phase 2 study, which wouldn't have been fully paid for out of this, but that was one source. School start end time, that we may not pursue that, but if we do, there's going to probably be some type of help we may need to get on a short-term consultant basis or something. That is just giving the flexibility to do that. There could be a number of other areas we'd look to.
So I mean, in the past, it's been the phase 2 study, it's been the leadership seminar over the summer. It was the special education audit a few years ago that was
Yeah,
done.
I think this actually just hamstrings us. There are things that come up in the life of a school district that the board has to make a decision on, and if there's no ability for the superintendent to do the research and/or get good input, then we have no way to make a
So,
good decision.
This is just giving a line item and giving transparency to something that we've been doing all
Absolute-
along,
I-
basically. So, okay, then that it gives me
I
a
would
better
be
understanding and
very-
a comfort with that. We are making it more transparent, understandable, and naming it. Fine. Okay. Then
I'm-
that-
I'm curious about advertising. I'm just curiosity, what have we changed from fiscal 18 to this year? What are we doing differently from an advertising perspective? Because we're going from a $2,300 budget to an $8,000 budget.
Well, you weren't a $2,300 budget, you were a $2,300 spend. So that was a year that we froze accounts and we pulled money back. So the advertising budget is twofold. One is recruitment and advertising for HR to find employees, and then it's advertising dollars for issuing RFP. So every RFP we issue, we have to publish it in a paper.
And if I can add to that, since part of that is my tiny little HR budget, part of that, if you recall, we added money a couple of years ago for increased minority recruitment efforts, which involves advertising in a couple of different venues. I'm sure you've, heard a lot of school districts, not even just Fairfield County school districts, but some of the urban school districts have real hard time recruiting minority teachers. So I came forward a couple of years ago and asked for additional money in that line for HR for that reason, and there's a few thousand in there for that too, which hasn't been frozen yet, or maybe it has, but we're hoping to use it.
So the budget for the last 2 years was 8,000. It's just that the expended was only 26.
Well, yeah, we increased it, I believe it was 2 years ago for the diversity recruitment.
That's correct. 3 years, that sounds right.
But we've frozen accounts for special ed, we've frozen accounts for, special ed, and that's one of the areas we've pulled back on.
So,
Well, let's go back to the 7,500. What decision was there on that? I mean, I've never seen a budget item that has just in case, like, we need it.
it's like the principal's fund. Would you be more comfortable if it were 5 instead of 7,500, or 5,000?
No, I think he's questioning the purpose of the line item, but I think we heard Sarah kind of say it's just kind of dedicating a line item to something that we're doing all along.
So in the schools, they have principal's funds for
Right.
the things that you need, that are necessary things to do in the school that have myriad names and just little things that when
Right.
you're running your house, that you
Right.
need to do, that
Right.
are just too many to come up with a name for.
Yeah.
And it hadn't occurred to me that we didn't have a line item for
And
that before in
where
the
where
budget,
did
and
that
I-
show up then?
It
In-
just didn't.
Where did it show up?
What, the consulting?
Before.
So-
We
yeah,
usually
it
did
didn't-
transfers
it
when we
didn't-
had to fund,
That's
when
what
we
I'm
had to
saying,
fund
is that
something.
it didn't show up before, and
And
now
we
we're
will
naming
continue
it and
doing
giving it a
transfers.
line.
Well, I think what we're hearing is that our habit of doing transfers is kind of getting us into a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, but, this will not, all this will do is cover, instead of doing transfers, we now have a little bit extras to cover it before we actually have to do transfers. I mean, all you're doing is giving yourself room, so you wouldn't have to do, you're giving yourself room, but not naming it as an actual budget item. I mean, you're just giving yourself $7,500 more room.
So if you classify the things that would fall into this category, Rich, how much have we spent as a line item over the past, say, 3 years?
So in 16-17, you spent $76,000.
Okay.
And the year after, you spent about $16,000. While the budget was $12,500 this year, it will be about probably $35,000 or $40,000.
I think it's because we're dealing with things that come
Right,
up.
so my suggestion would be that maybe we're not doing that. Maybe we're actually underfunding something that we know to be an ongoing expense.
Yeah, we're taking it out of other areas. Now we're just gonna take less out of other areas. That's all we're doing.
Will you be more comfortable if this is itemized as it's?
I, just listening now, it just seems like something that we've always, kind of always dealt with it in terms of the normal operation of the district, right?
Is that a sustainable practice, Rich? I mean, can we continue to do that, as Tony suggests?
Is it a good practice?
Well, if you do transfers, you're not doing something you intended to do. So whether that's purchasing books, or sending students to competitions, or doing a facility project,
Well-
or deferring a hire, I mean, that's usually where we're finding funds. It's very few spots in the budget where we actually just have, like, let's say, salary savings from staff turnover, or maybe like the Kerma liability came in under, or we got an equity distribution check. That's more, those are funds that are available that come to us that don't negatively impact any other area.
I guess, Tony, the only reason I mean, I know where you're going, is like, it seems like it's 7,500 for what? But because we know we have movement on the feasibility study, because we may be moving down on school start time, I think there's some pretty big initiatives where we may need some resources. If I didn't know for a fact we have those two big things going on that may require it, I would be right there with cutting it, but since we have very
Well,
specific
I'm-
initiatives that are
I'm
in
the
process.
minority here, so it's fine.
I don't actually like that, that you're saying it's only because we have those two things. I'm more comfortable with the thought that this is an ongoing necessity to operate the budget, that this is an ongoing necessity for Bill to run central office and how we do it. I don't, if this was just for these two things, then it should be part of those,
Well,
separated
the
out.
year from now, there'll be two
Yeah.
There'll be two new
That's-
things.
yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's a rolling thing. What I'm
Yeah,
saying is, we
that's-
know there are
I'm
initiatives.
just clarifying for sort of the ongoing
Yeah,
public, that I think this is a necessary line item in
I
central
mean,
office functioning.
Yeah, I mean, as a board on this, you have to come down where you're comfortable.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, it's quite
Yeah.
standard for
Yeah.
a superintendent to have a flexible fund, and this is incredibly modest at 12.5. To give some flexibility for needs that arise where you need to provide that help. But in the, in the tight environment, if you're feeling more comfortable, pull it back down, we'd have to look at reallocations. But as Rich has told you, we're running well above that rate. And we're trying to find areas where we can document expenses, budget for that, and be accurate. So that's what's led us to, even knowing the run rate to still be pretty modest at the 20,000. But that is a big percent increase. Again, it's small numbers, small dollars. But it's, whatever you're going to feel most comfortable as a board.
Sarah, where are you?
I actually think I'm okay with this line. I'm okay with it. I
Dan?
am, now that I understand what it is.
Dan, good?
Yeah.
I, yeah, I did want to circle back to the advertising and check with Louis. You don't think you could pull it back to like 4,000? Do you think that you need the full 8? I mean, because it was 2
Well,
and
I'm
then
not
it was
sure how much
4.
of that-
The eight isn't all HR.
Oh, it isn't? Okay.
No, part of it covers RFPs.
RFP process.
RFPs and the
So
see,
each time he puts out an RFP, it costs money.
because
So
it had
if
been
he's done
2 and then it was
6 this
2,300
year,
and then it was, so you really do, I just want to just check and make sure we really fully, we are looking at every nickel
Yeah,
and
I
dime this
mean,
year.
the less RFPs we issue, the less we need it. I assume, and Louis can speak to it, the less people you have to hire, the less ads you're gonna put out.
Right, I mean, part of it, although that's generally true, the ads, though, that we run for
The-
just general hiring are mostly free. So we sometimes, if it's an administrator, although hopefully we won't be hiring any administrators this year, we'll go to, a more national publication. Obviously, we have no newspaper anymore. We do post a lot of our positions online. That's not the expense. Where the money really is it's an ongoing effort to try desperately
Right.
to hold ourselves out as a place that wants
Yeah.
minority
Right.
employees.
All right.
So I'm, if you want to take $1,000 off it, I'll live with that. But I mean, it's
I don't want to shortchange you. I'm
no,
just
it's
looking at,
okay.
like-
It's just it's
Yeah.
Rich is right. I mean, this
Yeah.
year, I mean, just listening to y'all tonight, I don't think I'm going to be hiring a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
unless a lot of people leave, which hopefully is not going to happen. So it's not, but that's not where the cost is. That
Mm-hmm.
frankly, most of our postings for positions within the state of Connecticut, just general postings, are on a free service.
Okay.
So that's not the issue. It's more the marketing and the trying to build, like, for instance, going to recruiting fairs, that kind of thing.
Okay.
The Yukon Fair, Jen's going to a fair in New England this year, to hopefully reach out and try something new. We've gone to a lot of these things and haven't had a lot of luck getting people to want to come to Connecticut. But that's somewhere where the money goes.
Okay, I didn't understand that, thank you.
No,
That-
sure,
That was
of course.
helpful. That was actually helpful, thank you. Okay.
Within, I don't know where this shows up, but within the context of district administration, from the list, item number 9, reduction in non-personnel,
Yeah, that's-
non-contractual expenses.
Yeah, that was.
So it's across the 4 schools, curriculum and instruction, and special ed.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes,
We'll
please.
take it.
Yeah, I
Yes,
mean-
please.
Done.
Absolutely.
Now that you're coming up to facilities, you accepted number
Wait,
7.
wait.
We didn't get the
What
facilities
about
yet.
Copy Center?
No.
That's our next
That's
session.
what we're
Is
in.
everybody done with, yep, district admin?
Yes.
Well, I had a question that I should have asked during high school, but I thought it was in district admin, so I saved it. And this is more of just a clarifying question. Could someone please explain to me the role of the high school business bookkeeper?
High school book.
The high school business bookkeeper. I just don't understand what that role is, so I just.
So they manage the student activity accounts for all 4 schools.
Okay.
As well as the Memorial Trust. Issuing checks, bank reconciliations. It's the one area that you probably have the most exposure to risk because it's really the one area where you have cash. So they're collecting the cash deposits for, maybe a fair or theater or whatever it might be, or parking. They're actually collecting those deposits. We're doing the reconciliations. That's really the items that they're doing.
And this was a consolidation of functions that were throughout the district that were brought
Right, so
into
the individual
one
does
person.
all student activities for all schools.
Okay.
The title is because that's where she is.
I'm sorry?
The title is because the position is at the high school, but really it is a district-wide function, and there's a lot.
Okay, but it sounds like this position is the result of an efficiency that
Yes.
created it. So,
Absolutely.
okay.
Business practice.
Thank you for the explanation.
Anything else before we move on to facilities? No. Do we want Rich's update, or people have questions and we just want to?
I was questions.
Okay.
First, can we accept your generous offer to reduce the cleaning contract line? Please.
How much is it?
4889.
Oh, yes, exactly. We will take that.
Yes, please.
That was already in.
Yeah.
Okay.
It will be important for you to have read Rich's
Yeah.
updates,
Mhm.
however,
Yep.
because it addresses 4
Yep.
other line items.
Yep. I'm going to make a proposal about moving the lightning protection at the 18 over to the capital budget.
So it is not capital.
Why?
A repair and maintenance item is not a capital item.
But-
If we were putting
that
in
line
new lightning protection,
Right.
we're repairing frayed cables. You're putting in you're repairing fasteners.
Mhm.
It's the equivalent of, repairing like a ceiling tile.
Okay.
that,
So
you
it's
know,
not
fails.
repairing the whole system, you're just patching.
Correct. You're
For
fixing what's wrong. with them.
$18,000?
They're not cheap.
No, things are expensive. Also just maintenance items, which this really is,
Okay.
are the statutory responsibility of the district, and that's why we
Yeah.
don't put it
I had
into-
assumed that for $18,000, we were getting kind of a new system.
I would too, but.
Jeez,
you
all
know,
right.
I don't have any
I will
lightning
accept that answer
protection.
because I had assumed that this was going to be a new, that is, wow. All right. That's insane.
Well, it's a large school.
Still.
So, with the 40,000 for the boilers, walk me, like, the detail, we read your thing, I mean, we know we have to service the boilers, we know. This is not a standalone service contract, for 40,000? This
So a
is.
standalone service contract would be significantly more.
Okay.
It is to provide materials for pumps and valves and steam pipes. We showed that image of that rotted out steam pipe at Hurlbut. That boiler is again having difficulties. We are again having to have the maintenance staff go to Hurlbut and address those pipes. We have 22 boilers in the district. It's not like we have 4 where it's 1 per building. It's 22 in the entire district. It's an average of, less than $2,000 a boiler is what we're looking at.
I guess we talk about that when we get to it. And the plumbing is the same thing, it's just a general.
So it's to, do pumps and backflow preventers. A lot of this equipment is aged and it fails, and you constantly have to test it, you constantly have to replace parts. Just I think it was in December, we had a backflow preventer fail at the high school. This causes routine maintenance that has to be done. If we look at the facility study report that was done, these are the type of items that they recommended, annual reoccurring investment of dollars into these areas.
So I guess my question is why the normal giant bucket of that category, why isn't part of that, not all of it obviously, but why isn't part of that sort of?
So we don't have a specific there's no specific boiler account in the chart of accounts.
No, I know that, but we have like a big bucket that goes towards this sort of maintenance and repair parts and
Yep.
whatever. So why wouldn't some of those monies be rolled into these?
So we run short in that repair allowance account every year.
Every year.
Systems
no, I know
don't
you do. I'm
fail
kind of asking
expectedly.
for like everyone to hear the
Right.
answer.
Systems don't fail expectedly. They fail unexpectedly. And when like a pipe bursts, you can't just leave it. You
Right.
can't just let the water flood into the room. You have to you have to bring companies out. Our guys have to get materials. They have to do the repairs. It's 600,000 square foot of they're like commercial properties. They're schools, but they don't operate like your house. It takes a significant amount of time. It takes a significant amount of investment to actually make these buildings work functionally. And if we look at the age of the buildings, I mean, Hurlbut's an older building. The middle school is an older building. The WIS, even though it's not an older building, probably has more deficiencies than some of our older buildings. And if we look historically at where we've had to spend money in repair and maintenance, it's actually the WIS. We put more money into roof repairs at the WIS. The water heater failed last year at the WIS. It looks very nice. It's aesthetically pleasing, but it's expensive.
So I want to ask,
I was gonna say, so here, I'm asking another sort of question so that it can be in the record of, on a sort of past couple years, how much of the sort of, was our budget spend? And how much did you need to sort of beg, borrow, and steal for that sort of maintenance parts and pieces?
What's typically happened is we've had to defer projects and not do them.
There you go.
So if we look at last year when we had the $1.6 million shortfall in special ed, $200,000 came from facilities.
Right, so when we need to look at this bucket for boiler parts and plumbing, when my question to you about why couldn't we roll into, that's the answer.
how many people do we have working on facilities maintenance in the district?
So the maintenance staff are 5 people.
5 people. And so when you have to increase buckets of money for constant repairs like this, and you are also paying overtime for those 5 people because they can't quite accomplish the 300 hours of man labor to do those projects, are we being penny wise and pound foolish by having such a small core of people to do the work? Or if we had one more, could we cut down on some of the overages that we have to spend in emergencies?
So more staff would help, but when we look at the overtime budget, part of it is we do the fields for the town. So while we get reimbursed, the expense hits the overtime account, the revenue hits the revenue account. It's kind of like technology revenue and then the expense.
Right.
We also maintain School Road. We cut School Road. The expectation is School Road is supposed to look nice. We don't want the grass to be long. Even though School Road's not our responsibility to maintain, we maintain School Road. you know, if we look at maintenance repairs, if, you know, one of our maintenance guys gets a call at 10 o'clock at night that says the boiler shut off, he's not, you know, and it's a Friday night, he's not waiting to come in Monday morning, because if he comes in Monday morning, you're probably closing the school Monday morning, because it would be too cold to have classes. You know, one more maintenance staff, when you factor in salary, benefits, pension, payroll taxes, you're probably looking at $100,000. When you strip out the fields portion from the overtime account, you're not bringing that down to $50,000 for the year. So you're not really going to have like a net reduction by just adding a person.
Thank you. That was, thank you.
So,
And it's not like we could hire somebody that has the expertise for some of these
So-
items that you're
We
going
have
out.
So we have a plumber on staff, we have an electrician on staff, we have a carpenter on staff, we have a general maintenance mechanic whose background is more like HVAC work, so they have specific tasks. Some of the items.
I'm thinking like the roof, like it's not like you have a
So-
roofer.
You're not going to be able to hire one commercial roofer and really take care of everything. So when a roof needs repair, you know, a roofing company is bringing in a team of roofers.
So, Rich, I appreciate the breakdown over the overtime line item, because anytime you see overtime, you question it, because it's out of the norm. So when you take away the fact that there's the revenue offset for taking care of the fields, and the fact that, you know, things don't break on schedule, or snow removal is almost always overtime, just because of the nature of that. It kind of makes me feel better about a large portion of that line item. But the one sticking point just for me is how we manage our traffic in the mornings and in the afternoons. And I understand the need for safety, and I understand the need to control traffic flow. And I understand what you were saying before about it's very hard to hire someone for 90 minutes in the morning and 90 minutes in the afternoon. Except for that is actually the dictionary definition of the job of a bus driver. So
Which
I mean,
we're having difficulty
right,
finding.
so that's what they do. But just my challenge to you is I think we need to take a look systematically at the way we address this, because if we have, if we're incurring overtime, because as you said in a previous meeting, our maintenance people, our skilled technicians, are working a 6-hour day because 2 hours is dedicated towards doing maintenance, we're not maximizing our resources, and we're not utilizing these people to the best of their ability. So I would ask that you take a look at how we manage this from a district level, so we're not using our very skilled technicians to do a job that could be filled by a variety of people.
We will take a look at everything.
Okay.
I did have one question about the fields and the overtime, and some of those fields don't need to be overtime hours, though, because they're not near the buildings, correct? Like Revson and central office wouldn't impact students if they were during the day, correct?
Oh, well, we do try not to have the groundskeepers near the buildings during the day.
Right, but those aren't near
they
the
also have
buildings.
their regular tasks that they have to do, so when we're maintaining the fields, it's like
That's-
an extra duty,
Okay,
really.
gotcha.
And if I can just clarify to Dan's point, for the traffic, the people who do the traffic, if it's not the maintenance staff, I mean, it still has to be AFSCME staff. So, because it is their union work, so I just want to make that clear.
I'm not suggesting that we bring it outside of the union. However,
Okay.
if you create a different position that is traffic management as opposed to master carpenter that happens to direct traffic, you could still fall within the union and within AFSCME.
Right, but it would be a 90-minute in the morning and evening job.
It'd be 45 minutes in the morning, 45 minutes in the
Extremely
afternoon.
difficult to get someone of the quality that we want here, but we could try. I mean, but I'm just telling you, that's a tough recruiting
I understand.
effort. But an accurate point on your part.
That's what I just wrote.
So, I have a question about our virtual net metering credit. On page 205, you're estimating a savings of 89,000 and change. And then there's an offset for increased kilowatt consumption. But then on page 273, it looks like our run rate for our savings this year is already at 51,000. So it looks like our run rate is beyond what the 89,000 would
Yep.
be. And if we're using more electricity,
So
I would
there's-
assume we're gonna get more
So there's two
credits.
factors. So this was signed well before July 1st. We didn't actually receive any credits until I think it was like mid or late August. But we got back, we received essentially credits from April, May, and June, so from the previous year. They just kind of dumped them into, I think it was the August or September bill. So you're not going to get, so you're essentially this year, instead of getting 12 months, you're really getting, I think, like 16, 17 months. So you're obviously not going to get 16 or 17 months next year.
Okay.
The other issue is the panels actually degrade over time, so you receive a small amount less each year as you go forward.
Okay. And then, okay, it's just your schedule in 273 said July through December.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Anything else, guys?
Nope.
Security? Transportation? Copy center?
Yes. I wanna go home. I actually had a question about, so, as I understand it, with the substitute coverage, a large part of that need is because of our turnaround time. I went back and looked at when we had originally had adopted the copy center and the enormous savings accrued to the district from the adoption of the copy center. If anyone is interested in the public in looking in the budget in 2010, I believe, if you have questions about the copy center and why we have it, it is very interesting. Anyway, I'm thinking that perhaps could we consider not having the substitute coverage for a year and looking at it and saying our turnaround time is 48 hours or 3 days, and you guys know that. Here's your notice about that, and seeing how
So
that goes. Could we try that?
we've already sent out new notices, but it's
Oh, you already
not
did
just.
that, and I missed that.
Yeah,
I'm
so
sorry.
it's not just turnaround time, it's absenteeism. I mean,
How did I not
if we
see
did
that?
have to pull back a little bit of money, you probably could take like $2,000 from that, but we are gonna have substitute coverage. We only have one person, so when they're out, and they will actually probably be out in the coming months, we do have to backfill it, or we have to close the copy center. Part of it also comes in the
if you
beginning of the
close the
year. If we look
copy
at the
center-
beginning of the year, we ended up having to put central office staff there who copied until 9 o'clock at night. You had to pay them for that time. We had 2 administrators stay here until almost midnight
Wait.
delivering the mail.
Wait,
this
wait,
year.
wait.
Yes, that all happened.
Why?
Because the year before, if you recall, we had a 1.5 FTE in that department. That half FTE is gone. We had one person who had to try to make copies for the entire school district. And Dr. Tunks was, what, a wheelbarrow, or what were you pushing around on the street?
Could the the new line item be used to send things to Kinko so you guys aren't doing that? I mean, I'm sorry, that does not.
No, that was horrible. It was horrible.
Well, I think we need to understand, because the second question from my two-part question on Tuesday night was not answered. I would just like to hear from the principals, how often is your staff utilizing the copy center?
Well,
For 100% of the work? Like what,
no, not 100%, but, I mean,
50?
at least, I'd say. I mean, anything that's, actually, it's bigger over the high school.
It's bigger than high school.
I would say that the staff does use it, but for example, many of our assessments, midterms, finals, frankly, they prefer to do it themselves at the school because although they're very confidential and everything, there's something about having it and doing it and making sure everything is perfect because those are really high stakes exams.
Yeah.
It's hard to put a number on it, but we do use it for large jobs. Given the reduction in the copy center that has happened over the year, we have taken on more of the copying at the building level.
Yeah.
But it's hard to put a number on it, a percentage.
And if I could just say one more thing on that, I was actually here in 2010, but unfortunately it came after they finished the budget, so the copy center was done. At that time, the idea was that we were trying to push the staff to make the copies in the copy center. So a culture started getting created over the years that that's what you were supposed to do, and that's what we were trying to do. We have since slowly reduced the copy center, eliminated the halftime position, and it was interesting discussions I was having with some of the staff union leadership about, well, what is the expectation? And our clear instruction, and that went out in updated guidelines also from Rich, is, go ahead, use the copiers in the buildings. That's what they're there for. So there has been a shift, but still at the beginning of the year, there is a reliance on this sort of heavy production. And the turnaround times at that time that we were promising were very different than what we are now. So, no, agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also,
If I could just chime in, I think there are certain crunch times during the year, and I think that's where it does make sense if there is an ability in the budget to have additional staff in there. We know the beginning of the year, teachers don't come back until just a few days before, and they need to have all of their first day handouts done. But it's been a culture shift as we migrate from a little bit away from using the copy center and using our building copiers more.
okay. And do you think we're maximizing the potential of just digital? Just not even using the copying center, just transmitting as much digital information as possible? Are we maximizing that area?
It depends on to whom
I
you're
have to
giving.
find a microphone. So we actually do quite a lot digitally. There is a balance that has to be struck. So when digital was real popular, and 10 years ago you heard a lot about elimination of textbooks and all of these things. It was sort of the beginning of that process. And it's always scary when I'm the one who says this and I have digital and technology in my title. But the reality of it is that at this point, having worked through this for 10 years, and now that the industry has sort of seen how things are with students, how they learn, and what best practices are, you actually don't see as much in the way of digital, especially in the areas of reading. There is actually more research now showing that the idea of reading online or reading through devices, the students learn slower. They don't absorb as much, and that the concept of the physical text is more valuable. So all of our staff strike a balance. It's actually part of the professional development that Ken and I are working on for this coming March. So that balance exists, but you're not going to see the significant shifts that would have been talked about 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, just because you don't really see it as part of the learning process anymore.
I'm sorry, can I add something?
Sure.
Where we see it, especially at the high school, is in the production of the student work. For example, is all of the essays that they write, documents they submit in Google Classroom, presentations, things like that. You won't see a student with a essay unless it was an on-demand prompt in class, and then even then, most of them are done digitally. So it's in what they produce, you will see it more digitally. But teachers do still need paper.
And what's really cool, Ruby, is that the teachers, you'd get your papers back the teachers do it on the computer, and the kids get the responses in their, I don't know what you call it, the
Comments in
online-
Google Drive.
There you go.
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
clearly the worst parent ever, because I'm clearly don't tell Lisa not looking
No,
at
I
my
was
high
also
schoolers'
just thinking more
responses.
around the memos for parents as well.
Oh,
Just
yeah, that's all.
transmitting all that digital.
All digital.
Okay, thank you. District-wide?
Yeah, I had a quick question for Rich. The internal services fund, right? Where does that rest? Like, what is that in?
We're skipping district-wide?
That is district-wide.
No, it's a separate thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll wait.
So excited.
So nothing for district-wide.
We have nothing. Just want to make sure. Internal Services Fund.
Yeah, Rich, I have a question on the internal services fund. Where does that money sit, and what's the return on it? And are we allowed to get a return on it? And
So it sits with the town. So the town does, invest, dollars and has low interest rates in certain areas. So we don't earn any return. So we do have a balance of about $1.5 million in the account, but if you're asking, like, do we get like an interest rate every year that, you
That's
know,
exactly
every
what
month
I'm
that we
asking.
could, you know, book to the account, the answer is no.
Why not?
Because
Because it's
the,
not our money.
Oh, so does the town get that money? Does someone get the money?
the town.
Okay, as long as we're doing something with it other than parking it
Yeah,
at
I mean, so the
0%.
town does invest their money in, you know, when large bills come through, you know, the town departments will move it from, you know, certain money market accounts to, you know, other accounts so, you know, the checks can clear.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that there was some return generated. I don't care if it's for us or the town. Thank you.
All right, with that, we have finished going through the operating tabs. So, is there any appetite to come to a final decision around kindergarten? We never finished that discussion.
I'm inclined to roll the dice and reduce it.
I agree.
I'm not inclined to do something that's rolling the dice with our kindergarten
All
enrollment.
right,
Gina,
let
when
me
you said table it.
let me rephrase
Oh,
that.
no, no, I said table it to come back at the end.
I
So
am-
my
I
whole
thought you
different-
meant table it for another
No,
day.
I am
No.
comfortable with the numbers and the patterns that we have been seeing, that we will most likely not need that section, and that we would be pre-taxing the residents in a way that we should not be. And that I am comfortable with the word of the Board of Finance, that should we need that teacher, we can go and ask. That's just where I am this year.
And we're including also the figure for the para.
The para.
If that is a cut, then yes.
Yeah. Well, to that I'd like to speak because, you know, if we're now pushing the upper limits of our kindergarten class sizes, we may be relying on an extra para. I mean, I had asked Bill for a question. The information hasn't come back yet, so he didn't share it out. But, you know, there are other districts who have a full-time one-on-one para for a kindergarten class. We have 0.2 or whatever the case may be. But if we're putting ourselves in a situation where we're pushing the upper limits of our kindergarten enrollment, you know, that para cut might not be a given.
Again, I don't think anybody's talking about,
They're not cutting a current para.
we're talking about not hiring an extra one, and we're not talking about pushing anything. We're talking about staying in our guidelines, and if we go over, asking to readjust.
I don't think there's anything in the data that suggests that we are going to fall within 6 class sizes. Not any of the similar years with birth rate, not any of the past projections, not any of the information from the demographers. And when you factor in the element that we're now cutting an existing staff member and looking to get a supplemental to hire back at another time, this one's a deal breaker for me. I'll vote against a budget that doesn't have 7 kindergarten sections. I'm sorry, that's how strongly I feel about it. I think this is a horrendous mistake to make this cut.
Well, we have 6 now.
I'm talking about for next year.
I know, but you're saying you'll vote against a budget that does not have 7 kindergarten sections, and I'm just saying out loud, we have 6 now.
We have 6 now because we have a lower enrollment than what's projected. We have 107 students in kindergarten this year. We're projected to have 128. It's apples and oranges. It's 2 different cohorts. I don't object to the fact that we wouldn't have 7 kindergarten classes. I object to the fact that we wouldn't have 7 kindergarten classes for the amount of students that we are projected to get. I'm not making myself clear on that. I can see.
I don't
You are.
agree with
Okay.
you.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
you are making yourself very
Okay.
clear.
Okay.
Yeah, we just
Okay.
don't agree.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have, I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
Jacqueline, do you have an opinion?
Mike?
On this,
Jacqueline, Mike?
the budget. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I appreciate the budget approach of going with 6 versus 7.
I do as well. Ellen, you were a yes? You are?
I think there's no risk in planning and assessing and going back if we need it. That's what the system is for.
Yeah, I agree. Right.
So, Ellen, could you just speak to the fact that you're essentially, so what is your thinking on disregarding the projection and making a decision contrary to
I
that.
still think the projections are too iffy. I don't think there's enough of a convergence of thoughts between the two methodologies yet, and I think it's still out. I think the hope that this firm is better able to do it based on their methodology is what we're all looking for. But I don't think it's there yet, and I don't think the numbers have shown us that we are in danger yet. I'm not gonna sit back and allow 22 kids in a class. It's just not in my makeup, and I think I've proved it long enough to make sure that people know that I'm here for, I would like to go to 15 a class, so you're talking to the wrong person.
No,
But
I
I
get it.
don't think at this point in time, the information is in, and I think the judgment to be conservative in our planning right now is safe. I don't think we're putting anyone at risk. That's what I
Okay,
think.
that's fair, I appreciate that. Can I just ask a quick question of Lewis? So, because to Ellen's point, Malone and McBroom was wrong this year. We have 107 kindergarten students. How many did they project that we would have?
That's in there somewhere.
They projected 119. So they're off by 10. And they've modified their model.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's right, I'm looking at it right here, the
Yeah, I know.
projected age.
Couldn't find it.
Modified their model based on that to try and get it tighter.
So they've accounted for that.
That's what their hunch is, though they would say this is the trickiest area. But I mean, they're an expert firm. They looked at that, they've modified their model.
No, they're very good. Kindergarten is just volatile in Weston.
What's the margin of error, do we think, on this projection of 128?
Projecting enrollment for.
The problem is we don't know that. I
Right.
mean, that's their business. They figure that out. They were off, they modified, made a new projection, and part of that was the birth rate going back 5 years prior. So what happens is, and we've seen it go both ways. We've seen it go where they were way under on kindergarten, and we've ended up having to add a teacher. This year, they were over. So now the instinct is, oh, they were over, so maybe we should go under. The problem is we don't know what the margin of error is. That's part of their calculation. They look at births and then projected move-ins for a birth to kindergarten ratio. And they modified the ratio based on their experience of having missed the target for this year. So in theory, they've incorporated a level of conservative, projections into it already. Whatever you decide to do is whatever you decide to do, but, I mean, we don't know what the margin of error is.
No.
It's when you look at it, it's been within 10, it's 10, it's not 1 or 2,
It's 9.
plus or
It's
minus
actually
10,
9.
But
Yeah, if you look at the birth to kindergarten enrollment ratio going back 15 years, there's no year in which the ratio is as aggressive as what we're predicting now. We're predicting 71 to 120. And there's 1 year, that's 2012-13.
I think
Well,
regressing
that's
over
not
longer periods
right.
of time, I think is a mistake because, I'm not a demographer, but I think the last 5 years shows a very different dynamic than the previous 10.
Well, if that's the case, the last 5 years, last year you're looking at
The actuals
a
are
doubling.
The actuals are trending down.
But you're looking at 55 births to 109 students, 64 to 113, 49 to 128, 61 to 124, 71 to 140. There's your last 5 years. You're almost double.
But only half of the prediction is due to birth rates. The other is due to immigration as well.
Right, but assuming I hang my hat on this argument, then we should be projecting 142 for kindergarten, which we're not.
Right.
If I'm projecting just a double birth rate to attendance, to enrollment.
And we have 142, we got to do it.
Yeah.
We've,
I mean, I would balance this data with our practice of what we do
Right.
during the time going into September.
Yeah.
And I think the 6
Which I would push on any agenda, on any day, to make sure that we had the sections for the numbers of students that deserved it. And to your point, Dan, and I think it's very valid, to your point about the staff that we've raised and cultured and supported, you know, nobody wants to look at not being able to be inclusive of them in the next year. And I think that the administration is, I think, very sensitized to that fact. And I mean, I don't think that's ever disregarded. I think that's a very valid point.
So reduce K to 6 with Dan's objection.
Right.
And Sarah, there's no way you would reconsider an increase to athletic and company fees? I just,
No, I can't. Not without, and I don't mind if you guys vote without me, but I cannot do that without hearing back from people. I cannot do that. I'm not comfortable. I'm sorry.
Well, I think we need to have more discussion on it.
Yeah, that's just not.
Is someone keeping a very good list of the things that need to be discussed well in advance of next year's budget?
Well, I mean,
Everything.
I would suggest it's
not me.
the themes from this list of 17,
Okay.
because I just would urge us, we're going to have to watch this K1 very closely.
Absolutely.
Because
Yes, we
I,
And to
That's not up
Lewis's
for
point,
debate.
it's gonna have to
We're
be
gonna have to
decided
watch it really
earlier rather
closely.
than later.
I mean, I understand your concerns, but if Malone McBroom, and I know you've just decided, I don't want to sort of reopen the whole thing, but I'm a little worried it's going to be really tight, because the other thing going on is you're at a 17.8 now. If your druthers are staying smaller at the K level, it's not going to take much that we're typically right at 19 or 20. I mean, because if you just do the math on 6 times 19,
So we can-
you know,
we can
you're
start
within
our-
their margin of error, and if they're trying to tighten it down, you know, we're going to be up at 20.
We can start our
Right.
weekly updates sooner rather than later this year, and we'll make our decision.
I mean,
Early.
when do
Long
you,
before the Board of
you don't
Ed.
tend to start
Yeah.
to see movement until the summer, though?
Sometimes we get a large influx over the summer, and my concern and consideration would be that if we lose the staff at that level, and I understand the rationale and the thinking behind it, but losing that at K and 1 doesn't leave me any flexibility should we get the influx over the summer, which we sometimes do, going into first grade particularly. At that point, we've lost the staff, and then we're scrambling
Right.
to try to hire a teacher who, you know, and I think Dan had a very valid concern earlier about the amount of professional development and training, and our teachers are highly trained, highly effective, outstanding educators, and you don't find that 2 weeks before school opens, typically.
No, even with, in the past, you know, we do get, you know, to be completely transparent, I mean, we do get large numbers of applicants for elementary positions, but we get a very small number of Weston quality applicants for elementary positions. So we weed through, you know, a large number and very quickly realize that the vast majority, while I'm sure they're perfectly good teachers, aren't going to fly at Hurlbut. So doing that in the last couple weeks before school is tough. If the teacher who has been reduced, which you will do at your April meeting, or teachers, depending on how a lot of things shake out, what would happen would be they don't have recall rights like a tenured teacher would, because they're non-tenured. So we could reach out to them and see if they don't have a new job, and we would of course do that if we value the teacher, which I think we do in this particular case. We have our staff is exceptional. However, it's not ideal. So all I'm saying is what I said before is, you know, please keep an eye on it earlier. The other thing I just wanted to add, you were talking about the fees. Procedurally, you're not obligated to you can impose additional fees at any time. So you don't need to do it. It's good because it helps you balance the budget and figure out what your budget is. But if you were to go through a process and decide a particular fee can be raised, you can do that later.
Understand.
that's good to know.
Just to add one point to kind of piggyback on what Laura was saying about flexibility, the other issue is that we're already watching third grade, which is at 23.71. And so now we're saying that we're confident that neither K nor 1 nor 4 or nor 3 is going to see the increase, whereas, you know, that's a departure from our usual practice. I know last year we allocated 1 when we had 3 grades that we were watching to see if they popped. Now we have 3 grades that we're watching that could potentially pop, and we're allocating 0.
Gina, you knew my position on this, and I still stand with it. Between K and 1, my recommendation is to only drop 1 section, not 2. I went into this meeting tonight with withholding 1 and dropping 1 section out of K, just again, going against projection. Historically, have we ever been at 128? Has it ever been the second highest enrollment, et cetera? And then I think also hearing Laura tonight, I think 2 sections up front is risky.
And
that's not to say that we might not do it a month from now. If we have pressure from the Board of Finance, or the Board of Selectmen, or the town, and they speak up and they say that we need to tighten up, that very well may be the area. But to do it now just eliminates all our options.
I don't think it does. I think
I don't like that.
I don't think it does. No.
I'm not gonna hold back. If I think something is something that needs to be done, whether I want to do it or not, obviously these are the sort of things I don't like doing. These are the sort of things that we absolutely do not like to do and hate doing, but if I feel like this is something that needs to be done in the budget, I'm not gonna hold it in case the Board of Finance pushes me. I mean, that's not an argument.
And I'm
that
not suggesting that we sandbag
so
or anything else like that.
if it needs to be done, now is the time to do it. If you feel like it's.
But we don't know that it needs to be done, and at that point in time, we'll have more information, because it'll be months down the road.
I guess the one thing
I'm done
also,
with sort of a-
I know that grade 3, if you looked at 23.7, but that's anticipating growth based on our
Right.
current second graders as well. And I understand, like, are we going to gamble with 3 or 2? But I think we kind of reached a point, like,
Yeah,
I'm
where I am with it, so.
I'm just going to ask a question, then I'm going to let it go. I question why we are engaging with Malone and McBroom if we are going to so blatantly disregard what it is they're telling us.
I am comfortable with them except with kindergarten, because like we've said, kindergarten is volatile, it's all over the place. That's the one I'm willing to say I don't. They have all of the firms, it's not them, it's NASDAQ, it's everything. Then that's where I come out on that, that's me, but I think that's what Ellen said as well, but I've already said my piece on this, so.
Yeah, I still think this one's not completely to bed yet, because I understand the volatility of kindergarten registrations, and we have that every year. I think the pause is with 3 on the cusp, cutting 2 gets a little too much when you think about all of it. But this is where I think you have to think about other things to balance it out. And maybe we're not ready to make that decision tonight.
Can somebody remind me of when we go to the Board of Selectmen and the
We
Board
have
of
to
Finance?
we have to transmit by the 4th.
So by charter, it has to go by the 3rd. We would typically do it no later than the 30th, or the first Thursday of the month. But by charter, the 3rd, and I think we go the 5th to present.
Oh, the 5th.
So can we agree that everything that we've discussed tonight is settled except for this one issue, and get some more data and get some more information and convene another meeting? We have the time to discuss this one issue before voting. I mean,
Yes,
we're-
and I actually think that gives us time to do some discussion about the fees, because increasing the fees can offset some of this that we're considering keeping. I mean,
Can we recap where we are before we convene, and, or, right after, in terms of a tally and
yeah,
where we
so,
stand?
Rich, you have the list?
Yep. So a first grade teacher, so that would be 88,624. The middle school textbooks at 11,429. The contracted cleaning service for 48,891. Special ed legal fees for 15,000. CABE dues for 10,600. Cuts across non-personnel, non-contractual accounts for 24,750. So leaving the kindergarten section out, it's a reduction of $199,294. So it would leave a budget of $53,466,710, or a 3.93% increase.
Willing to meet again. I mean, I
I'm
think-
willing to meet again on that as well. I just think that, yeah, I'm not ready to be officially done with the conversation on those two issues, because I think there's, I don't view a consensus from everybody on it. I think there's some open questions.
Who has the open questions? You do? Ellen
I
does?
do.
Dan does?
I'm willing to listen to
Okay.
the timing issue.
Okay.
It's just, my pause is having three, and I understand the Board of Finance
I will,
has,
can I just point out that Jacqueline's not going to be able to vote after tonight? She's resigned.
I understand that.
So we don't, which may throw the game
I mean, I guess here's the thing. I understand questioning the projections for kindergarten. But when you take that, we've already been aggressive with the projection on first grade, and that one I'm 100% behind, and I think it's the right call. To then be aggressive on the third grade projection, to have two of them pop, that's almost $200,000 to be a special appropriation right off the bat. That's a big ask. I mean, I have concerns about that magnitude of an ask right
Well,
out.
we were there 2 years ago. My first year here, we had that, and we,
But the
Well,
difference
but
is we
we-
had grades pop, not grades meet expectations, is the difference, right? We had grades that went over what we expected them to be.
I guess I'm saying it was not a good situation, over by 2, and then we did not go to the Board of Finance with that. We absorbed it, and it created, it was starting down the path of us shifting funding from other areas. But
I think the issue with the teacher that Laura runs, so if we feel that it's on the fence, then maybe we,
There's a cost to talent drain, not just the loss of the investment, but a loss of the.
if we're on the fence or somewhere, in the gray zone generally on this matter, then, and if we're willing to listen, why don't we just park it and not include it in this? There's not enough. We're Ellen's willing to listen.
Right, we
Dan.
need to do capital, and then I'm willing to bring it up one more time if anybody has any thoughts that come to their head, and then we'll have to move on to another night, but let's go to capital, because we have to deal with that. Middle school lockers. I know we heard from you the other night, Dan, and we got the backup about if we broke the project out in some way. Did you get this?
Yes.
Thoughts from people on lockers, where we are, what?
I had a question. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but my interpretation of your description of the locker situation here was that 6th grade was an immediate need, and it paled in comparison to the quality of the 7th and 8th grade lockers.
6th and 7th are more similar. 8th grade is different.
Okay.
6th and 7th, I think I said the immediate need is in 6th grade, with the 7th close behind that in terms of its lack of functionality, the number of broken kick open, pull open lockers. They're also similar in style. They're the smaller lockers, so that makes it more difficult as well for the students to fit their belongings. When you go to the 8th grade wing, those actually are newer lockers and are somewhat larger.
Okay, so is it safe to say that we could be comfortable keeping the 8th grade lockers as it is and just control our discussion to 6th and 7th?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
But the 203.5 doesn't match the 185 that's on the capital.
No, there's a
list.
discount if we do the whole school.
That was the benefit of doing the whole building
I'm
at
not
once.
reading either.
Something
Thank
tells
you.
me that discount might be there even if we don't do the whole school.
There's just something balancing everything you've said, Dan, about the need and the look and the ability to use them. I mean, it's just stupid to have things that you can't use. At the same time, we have lockers at the high school that the students don't use, Lisa, if I'm correct. They often shun using them and carry everything around with them all day long.
Yes.
So there are banks of lockers at the high school that I would love nothing more than to rip out and
Well-
repurpose that property for something better. But it'll take out the wall when we do it.
Well, there's also a couple of other things to consider. I remember, when the school doubled in size,
Right.
students stopped using their lockers. And we were actually talking today about a way to maybe get them to use it, remember at lunch today, to see if we could just at least start, because some of the lockers in the core area they're in great locations.
Right.
That being said, our lockers aren't in the best shape either in the core areas. The science lockers are the best.
Agreed.
And they are the very tall, skinny ones.
And they are the
So I don't want anyone leaving thinking that, and there's a big expense to ripping out the other ones. So I don't think it's feasible or practical. And although ours aren't as worn out as those 6th grade lockers, they're probably more in line with the 7th and 8th.
So let me just go through with the progression, because there's no advantage to taking them out of the high school and putting them in the middle school, because it won't work. If we are in earnest about possibly changing a configuration of facilities on this campus, to put that amount of money in new lockers that could not be moved to a new location would just be poor stewards of the town's resources, I truly think. Which is why I can't go for the whole thing, even though it would give us a 10%. But the time it would take if we went with a reconfiguration of the buildings on campus would be a 5, 6, 7-year commitment. Easy. I mean, it takes forever to get something built. So I could, in all reason, do one bank of lockers to certainly get 3
Functionality.
grades of kids over a 3-year period to having something. And I think if you're saying that the 6th grade is the worst, then I would take out the 185 and put in the 49.5.
Yeah.
And do one grade, make a statement, change the way they are, put in the shorter, fatter ones if that's better, or the ones you can't put a student in. I just want ones
Yes,
that can be used
that would be
for the right
important.
reasons.
Just,
It
the
has
graphic
happened.
in that,
It has
I'm
happened.
aware.
You know that. I can do one. I would be
I
able
think that
to
has a
support
likelihood
one
of
bank.
actually surviving the budget process as well, which is a bonus because you need them.
And I'm not sure if I mentioned last time, the other big difference between the middle school schedule and the high school schedule is they never have more than 6 classes in a given day at the high school, and sometimes not even 6.
You guys have 8
Whereas
now.
we have
8.
8.
Yeah. And they're younger. They're
Well,
just-
that's
they're
it.
just-
I was going to say, as the former principal, they're little kids, and we try to keep them, there's a big difference between a 6th grader and an 8th grader.
So,
Um,
and I would like to maybe take that protection, if you can, if you call it that, for the WIS kids, and give them one more year to maybe grow into their backpacks, if that's what's gonna happen. But I cannot support 185,000 for the whole bank.
I'm with you.
So that's my thinking.
I'm with that.
Well, that was a whole lot easier than I thought it was gonna be.
No, I think that's
Okay,
49.5 for that.
okay. I could keep going.
I'm done. Wait a minute, where do we come out on the,
Yeah, Rich, my mind's going. With the 20,000, I was under the impression that the town
For the
was gonna
streetlights?
pull
They're
all
gonna
of
pull
that
it, right.
onto
So I
their-
did speak to Jonathan, the
coming
town
out, yeah.
administrator. He said he was fine if we want to pull it out of the Board of Ed budget, but it would be put forward in the town budget.
Right.
But
fine.
labeled
That makes
as,
more sense.
but labeled as essentially a joint project.
Okay.
that's fine.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
fine.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of green, as you know. Anything that we can do to cut down on the environmental damage that we're doing to the planet, huge fan. And I did actually ask about these and the return on investment, and would love to do that, but sounds like until Westport gets theirs done, they aren't quite sure on what we can get and how. When they know for sure,
Yep,
then
and
I'll
he
probably
was-
be bugging you about it, but they don't know yet, so I'm not bugging you, so pull it.
Yeah, he was fine when we
Yeah,
discussed it.
so.
So, just a question about back to boilers again. We have boilers projected for next year, and one of those is the one that's giving.
You're gonna have to do South House next year for sure.
South House is the one next year. So I guess,
Wait,
Or, well, 2 years from now.
well, in the next
Right,
budget,
the next budget,
budget,
sorry.
sorry, let me be, the next budget. Is the concern around that boiler, with the challenges we're having, the cost of the constant repairs on it,
yeah.
the fuel
No, I mean, you
efficiency, is
still
there
have to-
any reason we need to think about, we just whacked $130,000 out of lockers, is there any reason to think about shifting the troublesome boiler to this year?
Especially when we're putting
I mean,
gazillions of dollars
so,
into repairing them. Do we wanna?
We've had issues actually with it just this week, so it wouldn't be a negative to push it forward, but you wouldn't be able to reduce the operating request by pushing it forward.
No, that's not what we're asking. We're
But
asking,
it is definitely, it's
yeah.
becoming a bigger need than originally anticipated when the capital
Well,
budget was done
I mean,
in
that's
October.
like when you were talking
We're gonna have to
about
pay
the
for it
ma-
at some
I'm
point.
just,
And Laura's kids may not have a heater, right?
I mean, of the 22 boilers, the boilers in Hurlbut are the most difficult boilers.
Right, so.
but South House, it's that one
South
though
House
that
is of them, yeah, South House is definitely in the worst shape. So South House was the image of that rotted steam, that was South House.
Rich, what's the deadline on the oil tank removal?
It would be, I believe it is the summer of, or June of 2020. So you basically,
This is it.
you have to do it this summer, or you're gonna be over
Right.
by
A
like a
month.
few weeks or a month,
Yeah.
or,
And the cost of non-compliance is?
well, if you get, it depends on if you get caught.
Oh, well, then no, okay, then no. I'm just, I didn't know if there was a grace period, or if
The lawyer in me
there's,
says, I don't wanna hear that.
or if it's firm. So there's no grace period, that's fine.
Wait, so are we talking about
not
maybe
yet,
moving
not yet,
that,
we haven't
or?
gotten there. I was just thinking, like,
We let the assistants go.
all right, thank you.
Good night.
Good night, guys, thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
You can stay if you want.
Yeah, there's gonna be no payoff.
No, I told them I'd yell
All right,
There's always a good reason to move something up, because something else is gonna add to the tier 2 or tier 3.
Right.
Mike,
And you always are gonna be catching up. So if you're taking a substantial amount off this year, there is a reason to move something
I'm
up.
just saying, we
but
just
you have
cut
to
a,
get,
we cut
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
chunk, and then the 20 is out. And if we're having issues with a boiler in one of our areas, if this is South House, it also impacts the senior
It
center.
does also
if we,
impact the
if we lose heat, like, so there's, this is one where, like, trust me, I don't wanna have to do it if we don't have to, but if we're like really at Band-Aiding here, should we consider moving that up?
is there something else that you could take off of tier
Possibly,
1
yeah.
Other question.
and balance the amount a little bit?
So not for that amount. You have to do the xenon plant.
Right.
The chiller you really do have to do.
Right.
You do have to remove the oil tanks. The fire alarm equipment and code upgrades are
Flip the water
something that
heaters?
has to do. Well, it would be difficult to, if the water heater goes, you have to fix it. It's like what happened at the West. The water heater went and you had to fix it. The one that you could probably push back a year is the gym floor.
How many years have we pushed that, though?
Many.
Every year.
And that's only
And that still doesn't even get us there.
No,
Yeah, I
it
was just say, that's
doesn't
only
come close to
28,000.
That still leaves us $150,000.
Laura, I'm going to check. That's all right on the gym floor?
Yeah, I don't think we should push that.
Yeah.
We should
I
do
mean,
that.
I don't
has
think
been
we have
pushed a few
enough
years.
savings to do the,
We could
Been
probably
like
get another
10
year out of
years.
it.
I don't
Isn't
think
that
we have the
dangerous?
money,
I mean,
the
at
other
some
pieces
point-
to
Not,
do the
not
full
today,
season.
but there's a little bump in the middle of the gym. I don't know how that's gonna develop
A
over
little
time.
bump.
We wanna push it another year,
doesn't
but I
sound
think it
good.
needs to
It's
stay on the
not,
list.
the floor is uneven.
Yeah.
It's been pushed.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
It's
mean,
been on there for a
it's
while.
not
gonna get
I think
flatter.
we need to-
It's not like we're gonna get the money to replace 350, it would be.
No, I don't think you take it out. I don't think we're going to get a dollar for dollar exchange.
Yeah,
No, no.
We've saved
It
$150,000.
needs to stay, I think. Don't you?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes, I think we saved 130,000 on the lockers and 20,000 on the lights. It's 150,000. So we decide if we want to bring a boiler in or not.
Yeah, these are our littlest bodies in that gym.
I think you have, I mean, it sounds like you have to bring a boiler in.
Okay, so which one?
The south.
It'd be the
South House boiler.
Okay.
That's the one that's causing problems.
So bring that
Sounds
in.
like-
And particularly with the impact to the senior center in addition to us. I mean, that's,
When we look at the amount of hours that the maintenance staff put in, it was, the good chunk of that was
Yeah.
Pearl Bud.
Yeah, the South House boiler requires a lot of maintenance. We call them regularly, if not daily, to come and adjust.
I mean, they were
and
there,
problem-
this week.
Yeah, a lot. It's becoming an increasingly bigger problem.
I mean, if you look at the drain on the maintenance guys' repairs and the potential impact of losing it, I would think,
Yeah, I mean, look, it's
Move
either be
that
this year
forward.
or next year, and frankly, how much money are you going to pour into it during the intervening time, patching it up if you wait, Frank, you know? And how much manpower?
Hopefully $200,000.
Right. So,
Okay, so you're at a bigger
well, that was a really good reduction.
no, it wasn't. You're up to
So you-
1,062,000.
1,062,500.
Okay. 500.
but you know what, this is the thing, once this goes,
Security.
once this goes to the town though, this is very much a joint request.
Sure.
I mean, we share South House. I mean, so
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've been having discussions with the other boards saying that we've been underfunding the capital maintenance of our buildings for far too long. And
Yeah.
it's coming now. It's coming back at us. So
And in the next year, we've got
Yeah.
enormous numbers coming for these sort of
Yeah.
things. And if we can move this one up,
these aren't luxury capital improvements. These are do these things or your buildings don't function.
Yeah.
So
So, in my exuberance over boilers, I skipped over the number 7, which are the roofs, WIS and the high school. This is the just to review, this is the 43,000 for the 2 schools from the Silktown estimates from the summer that
Mhm.
Board of Finance wouldn't give us. And then the difference is to deal with the concrete overhang
So the
at
40,
the portico
so the
of high
43,
school?
we're really estimating to be 45 because
Okay.
it's, it's close to a year past. Labor
Okay.
rates change in terms of the people who are doing it. The difference is the concrete repair.
Mhm.
The concrete repair really is a broad estimate. Silktown has to bring in a mason, and they're not willing to do that at this point.
No.
No, at the
No,
high
at
school.
high school.
The concrete repair.
A big
Yeah,
concrete
but-
thing that sticks out?
That's all right, it's a capital item. So the building committee can have had it.
Mhm. Let them do it, headaches. Yeah.
no.
And then security, we're all good with that. Okay. Right. Any other questions about the capital budget? Right. So here's the rub, guys. We have made a lot of decisions tonight, and we keep going around in circles on Hurlbut. So is there a piece of information that can help anybody change their mind? Is everybody set in stone? Like, do
Yeah.
we really need another meeting to address
I'm
that
willing.
issue?
I'm willing to come off my position, but I would need a statistical analysis of projection versus actual enrollment for the past 10 years. Juxtaposed with birth rates.
It is in all of the books. If you dig it out.
Yeah, well, okay, so I mean, I can do it, but we don't have that.
So you need a couple days.
But Ruby, you're good with the cutting one section, not two. And you want two.
And with the view that come back and address it if it comes.
Jacqueline?
My budget recommendation is
All right, so cut one or
Cut
cut
one.
two?
Cut two. She's cut two.
Cut two.
I'm cut one.
I'm cut too.
And I think I'm cut too.
You think?
Yeah, push it.
Oh, man. She's gravity, don't push her.
If I can make a
That's the vote.
procedural
Yeah.
recommendation,
Yeah.
procedural, but having, now this is my 24th budget, procedurally,
Wow.
yeah,
Yikes.
yeah. You can, since you've obviously reached consensus on a bunch of items, at least it looks that way to me, and this is the one item where you haven't, you can vote, you can make a motion on the one item you're not sure about, take a vote, and then proceed with the total vote.
Well, I think, Gina, did you just
I-
vote?
If, unless
Well,
you
but
really.
I think he's saying I have to actually do a motion on this, but what I just did where I queried everybody doesn't count?
No, you can do that too. It's just that if you want to separate the two items out so
No,
that you
we
have a
do.
final budget vote.
Mm-hmm.
So if,
Are we done?
I don't want to say, well, your call, but if you want to have a vote on the total budget, and this is the only item that you seem to have disagreement on, you may want to take a vote on this item first, and then assuming, just for the sake of discussion, that you decide to reduce the kindergarten from 7 to 6, put forward that budget then with all the other stuff you've already talked about and vote on that.
Well, the problem is that for two of us, it may change our vote on the budget. There are two of us for whom it may change our vote on the budget.
Well,
So we can't do
that's
that.
fine, but I
But-
mean,
so I guess-
you have to make a decision
Yeah,
somehow.
we have to make it, we
I
have
can
to
make
start
it
making.
now.
And that's a procedural way to do it, if you choose to, or just vote on the budget.
All right,
whatever you
so
want.
Tony, would
Can
you
we
like?
just echo what Laura said earlier, just in terms of when we cut sections, we are losing this talent that is not gonna stick around, potentially, that is not gonna stick around. And this is, again, this is why we love Hurlbut, is because of these nurturing, educated, professional teachers that our children are with for 8 hours a day. And we, if we say in the 11th hour, come July, oh, we need another teacher, are we going to get that level that we have come to love, why we love Hurlbut so much? I think the risk, I don't know, I disagree. I disagree with it. I think the caliber of teachers that Hurlbut has, that is why we attract so many young families to this area. And you feel it. I have personally heard prospects, Weston prospects, of walking through, getting the tour of Hurlbut, and on their way out say, wow, you really feel the love in that school.
Yeah.
I know, I'm just, I'm
Yeah.
I'm just, but again,
But
the
to Ruby's
vote
but to
had
Ruby's
2-1.
point, to Ruby's point, this may become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we pass tonight a budget that advocates for the pushing of kindergarten class size, we may in fact force the
We're not,
people are making choices when they
we're very clear, we're not advocating.
we no this is not this is unprecedented. We have a projection of 128 and we are saying that we are budgeting based on 120.
We're budgeting based on the fact that every year it is off projections, and we are looking at more what we've been getting.
Right, okay, so but that's the data I'm looking for. What is the percentage we're off every year, and as compared to the position, as compared to the percentage of 8 versus 128?
Gina, we have to
That-
put it,
Yeah,
we have to put an end.
It's-
I don't think we're going to come to consensus on this tonight.
But I mean, I guess the point is, I just don't know that, I don't know that there's a fact, I mean, I don't think there's a fact that's going to change Ruby's opinion. There's not a fact that's going to address the talent drain. 4 people seem to be comfortable with that decision, and that's That's a majority. So, I mean, I think that,
I agree with everything you said. I do too. I agree with what Dan said, but it still doesn't deny that right now, at this point in January, we don't have those numbers yet. But I would fight to the death for this in February or March. depending
I
on
just want to
what-
put, I just want to put this out as a compromise, guys. Trying to work through this. I feel like pushing the envelope with the 2 at this point is too much. I went into this thinking cutting 1. If we get pushback, I'm very much on the fence about this one. There's no doubt about it. If we get pushback, it's something that I would consider. But to do it now, before we're forced to go for the second one, that's where kind of I'm at. I see him on the fence, but I just feel like having 3 grades on the edge, having kindergarten we know has a birth rate blip. I understand we can't predict kindergarten, but that's a known fact. So those pieces combined with the potential talent drain, I would advocate for officially cutting 1 section in first grade and then holding out and seeing if we can make the case to keep the other position in. If we can't, if we have to make a cut in March, April, as we're moving through the process, that would probably be where I look. But you know what? At that time, we'd also have more information and more reliability about actual enrollments. Not that it's a done deal, Louis. I realize it happened. But at least we'll have some trend information to go on.
What is the
And do we have the
Yeah,
capacity to cut ourselves at a later date if
Well,
we have trend data?
another thing that
I mean,
we've,
I'm
yeah,
trying
Gina,
to-
if I may, we've been doing a little whispering here, and we didn't get Laura in it, but is sort of what is we can't name names, but sort of what is the impact here? Because it may not be as simple as just 2 teachers.
That's correct. I mean, we have teachers returning from leave. And there are so many moving parts in this process. And even if I tell you what they are, then I'm identifying people. So the way based on the information that we have now, depending on what if certain teachers choose to come back, and teachers must let us know by February 1, we're already looking at the possibility of losing up to 2 teachers just for that. Now, we may have some other options about assignments and other things that Ken and I and Laura will work hard on to mitigate. If you add 2 more now, that will be a certainty of 2. So you'll have 2 to 4 as a possible loss of teachers. Now, that's okay. I mean, that's how that we have enough non-tenured teachers that we can go into that pool, but these are good teachers. So that if that's part of your thinking, just know that. I mean, we're not going in with the superintendent's proposed budget plus the returns. We thought we could cover it based on some assignments, based on moving people around. But if you do these 2, that's 2 people. I mean, I don't see a way out of that. I don't have anyone else retiring. All retirements have been announced. I don't see any other attrition, absent some sudden someone telling me something. So that's okay. I mean, that's you have remedies to make that happen. But to answer Bill's question, that's what we're looking at.
Rich, the 393 was with both K and 1?
No, it was leaving kindergarten in as recommended. So if you were to take kindergarten out along with the para, it'd be 373.
373.
I mean, well, but you guys, I mean, I'm just saying,
I normally am the one who's making the decisions. I am. I mean, every year, well, you don't know, but normally I'm the one every year who's dragging my feet, doesn't want to do this, but we have had, like in 6 or 7 springs I've sat on the board, we've had grades that we're gonna pop every year, and they were don't sometimes. You just don't. And I
no, I know.
this budget and with these numbers are too close, they're just, we are the low cohorts, and I feel like we just need to make decisions.
Yeah, let me say one thing. I mean, if you're on the fence, I would be careful you're not going to back into a class size problem or the equivalent thereof. The reason you didn't want to do, and I respect it greatly, the K-1 or other class size adjustment was due to quality instruction, quality of student-teacher interaction. If we then have 3 classes where we're on the cusp of potentially pushing up and hiring late, I have enough experience to tell you, hire late, we will be reducing the quality of the instruction in the classrooms. You may be backing into what you were trying to avoid. If there's some assumption that even at 3.9, you're going to get pressure from the Board of Finance to you know, that's a couple weeks down the road. You may have a little more information on enrollment. This may be a place you want to go. But, I mean, as I've been listening to you all, listening to the community, that class size issue is so pivotal. Fundamentally, that's about quality of instruction. And if by doing this, you're immediately removing 2 of your best teachers at those early grades, and from what Lewis is telling you, if I'm translating correctly, that, I mean, in that group, you would be reducing excellent teachers. Am I understanding this correctly? And I'm not naming names. I'm just talking about that cohort and that group. So, verse 3.9, verse 3.7, right now, if you're going to get pressure to do more, you might be wise to be conservative and say, where there's the one, get more understanding before you go to the other. Because my sense also is we're not going to have good information on that until probably the end of the summer. And Lewis, check me on this if I'm wrong. Ken, Laura, Patty, late hires like that, it's tricky.
Yeah, you can get lucky, but it's
Is there
tricky.
any reason to think that Malone Broom can inform us with anything else other than what they've given us so far?
No, because they base it on, right, so the only other piece of data that would, you know, and I assume that they could possibly take into account would be spring home sales. So as the spring home sales develop, you'll get some idea, not of people coming in, but because they use projections and trends to try to figure out what your move-ins are. And move-ins aren't literally just also, by the way, move-ins to the town. They're move-ins of people coming from other, you know, private schools, from, you know, private kindergartens, that kind of thing. So, yes, I mean, we will see more, we'll know more registrations. The board changed their policy a few years ago, so it gave us some flexibility for people who are moving in within 60 days of the start of school. That, the group, though, tends to come in right in August.
You're not going to ever be able to get
I-
it.
That's August.
The other thing I may say, and I take this the right way, a very powerful theme early, and I was writing down, themes are do not want to make policy decisions forced by numbers, and do not want to make quality decisions forced by numbers. So if you're at this point with one reduction at 3.9, and if the rationale I'm hearing is it's too big a budget, so let's go down. But the trade there is you're trading teacher quality and K-1 interaction to get that. So you're using budget to drive that decision, which runs counter to, I think, some very bold thinking on your part not to be pushed by what another body might say, but saying true to your educational core. I just, as I've been listening and thinking, I'm just very worried that if you go quickly to 2 right now, the rationale I'm hearing is a budget reason, which runs counter to your earlier thinking to hold off on a whole set of things that we didn't want to bring to you. And you may need to go deeper in 5, 6, 8 weeks. And then we may know more. We may be able to guide you better. But a week between now and February 1, we're not going to know. The only thing is to call Mike Zuba, who I know very well, but he'll be like a good doctor or an attorney. He's going to sort of say this or that, because he doesn't want to later have you come back and say,
Right,
I
but
mean,
what do
you
you-
have to make the decision. My recommendation, though, would be at this point, not go deeper than the 1, and then you're staying consistent to what's been your guiding, as I've heard your guiding thinking.
And my point of view is, I'm 100% on board with voting for the 1 tonight, with the full caveat that for the next period of time, as we get further information, continuing to evaluate, and if we need to cut the other one, we cut the other one. But as of tonight, with the information we have, faced with the potential downs, I would rather stick with one cut.
I agree.
And I think Lewis's input
Yeah.
of the teachers that stayed.
I changed my opinion. I'm not comfortable cutting both now. So if that changes your numbers.
I think it does. I'm just gonna go around. Ruby, 1 or 2?
1.
2.
Jacqueline?
1.5.
I guess my thing is if there's room to wait,
That's the point.
There's room to
That's
wait.
my
That's
point.
my point.
then it's worth waiting.
That's my point.
Okay.
And what happens, how does that work then?
Well, you're not going, the Board of Selectmen doesn't have any
Right.
ability to cut the budget, no matter what.
Right.
So, you're not going to the Board of Finance until March the
Right.
6th. You could be better informed by your class
Yeah.
numbers by then.
Okay.
And I'm not gonna hold back to say that I think we should go for 2 at some point.
Right.
Yeah, and
But I am uncomfortable right now sending that message to the staff and the parents.
And Ellen, that's a great point, actually. I think that too many times the perception of this is it's an adversarial process between the Board of Education and the Board of Finance. This is a collaborative process. And when we go to them in March, if we have data that suggests that we did not make the right decision, we can
pull
tip
back.
them to that. We can tell the
can
Board of
take it again and
Finance,
say, "We can take a
say,
cut."
you know what, if we knew today, if we knew then what we knew today, we wouldn't have included this, and we would ask them, we can ask the Board of Finance to make a cut, and then we just deal with the public perception of it. But it doesn't have to be set in stone, and it should be a collaborative
It
process.
should be. You do have a fairly,
That's fair.
I think the Board of
New
Finance
Board
would
of
be very
Finance.
receptive to our going to them and saying, please cut our budget.
I have no
Safe to say.
problem with being completely transparent about our line of thinking on this particular cut. And being very open about where we sit and that we want time to evaluate where we're going. But I just feel to make a hard vote right now to go that extreme, I'm just not there yet.
I can agree.
I'm not there yet.
Okay. Fine.
Okay, so. Okay.
So you need a motion.
So we need a motion. What is our final, what is our number? Who's going to make the motion?
Do we have the motion language in CABE?
No.
Okay, well, I have the numbers in front of me.
Well, let's
Then
just
you're
confirm
making the
them.
motion.
Okay.
Let's just reconfirm the numbers.
Rich, make the motion?
So just the total dollar amount and the increase, or?
Uh-huh.
Yep. It's $53,466,710, or a 3.93% increase.
And the capital? Because
So
there are
the,
2 motions.
do you want the capital with the security as one lump sum, or broken out?
Break it out.
I think you should break it out.
Break it out. Keep
So the
security
capital, now 9 items, $1,062,500. The security would remain at $321,629, for a total amount of $1,384,129.
Okay. Well, you have to do the operating first.
May I have a motion, please?
Move that the Weston Board of Education adopt fiscal year 2020 budget of $53,466,710, which represents a 3.93% increase.
May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Ellen. All in favor? All opposed? Thank you. Did you get those? Thank you.
Okay.
Capital?
I move that the Board of Education capital facilities budget of $1,062,500 and an additional security budget for $321,629 for a total of $1,384,129 be approved by the Board of Ed.
May I have a second, please? Thank you, Jacqueline. All in favor? That's everybody. I saw you peeking around over there, Meredith. Rich, one possible request, though. If it's possible, just as we proceed forward with the capital budget, to quantify the manpower that's been used on that boiler that we pulled forward? Just to have some idea of the drain on resources that it's representing, in addition to the risk it poses for loss of service? Is that possible?
I could speak to the guys and pull timesheets, so.
Okay. I just think because if
Especially
we're,
the senior.
if we're, you know, we made the decision to pull it forward, having some numeric substantiation would be beneficial when we hit the other boards.
Yep.
If that's okay. Anything further this evening? Jacqueline, I know we officially said goodbye the other night, but thank you so much for your service. This board is a lot of work. It requires a lot of dedication, and very much appreciated.
Best board in town.
Gina, I do one quick thing.
Yes, Bill.
Yeah, just so the board knows, given a lot of interest in your vote tonight, a lot of anxiety, frankly, so I always do send a note out after your vote. I'll do that tomorrow. I need Rich to list from you, because I think I want to list specifically what the total is, but then what your reductions were, because there were a lot of concerns and questions about what might be reduced at this point. So, I don't know, maybe even send it this hour, because there are a few people very worried. But I'll just so you're aware of that. It'll be complimentary of your good due diligence and efforts, but I just want to make sure people know
The majority of
clearly.
the people that hung in until at least the last
Right.
15 minutes probably should know.
Right, right. But particularly with staff, because
Right.
having visited all of 4 schools, well, essentially all 4, a lot of attention to this.
And just so you know, I mean, as is our normal practice, Ken and I spoke to, I think, almost 10 people who may be affected by some of the stuff that was on the list. I know the game, this isn't over yet, but at least as far as your vote tonight, there's a lot of people that we can go back to and give them leave some breathing room for now. And we will do that.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn? Thank you.